Hello background historian crew, and welcome back to yet another daily episode. Tonight we will be exploring the extensive, deep, and rich history of Judaism. This religion spans back thousands of years, and it known to be the oldest amongst the three main monotheistic religions today. With that, dim the lights and prepare to doze to sleep. Part 1, Origins and Patriarchs, the Dawn of Judaism. The history of Judaism, and by extension the Jewish people, begins not simply as a matter of religious practice but as a weaving together of memory, identity, migration, and faith. To tell this story, we must return thousands of years into the ancient Near East, to the Bronze Age societies where the earliest threads of what we now call Judaism first emerged. This part will explore the patriarchs Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the covenantal vision that set Israel apart, the nomadic and semi-nomadic beginnings of the Israelites, and the gradual shaping of an identity rooted in the concept of a singular God. 1. The ancient Near Eastern world. Long before the Israelites appear in historical records, the Fertile Crescent was home to a dense network of civilizations. In Mesopotamia, the Sumerians and Akkadians had already developed writing, laws, and cosmologies. Egypt to the southwest was flourishing under its dynasties. In the Levant, the land bridge between Mesopotamia and Egypt, smaller city-states and tribal groups moved across plains and mountains, trading, warring, and worshipping an array of deities. Religions in this world were overwhelmingly polytheistic. Every city had its patron god or goddess, fertility deities governed the cycles of crops and animals, and kings themselves were seen as divine or semi-divine figures. Into this context emerged something profoundly different, the radical notion of one God who was neither bound to a single city nor defined by natural forces. This would become the revolutionary heartbeat of Judaism. 2. Abraham, the first patriarch. The biblical narrative introduces Abraham as the founding patriarch of the Jewish people. According to tradition, he was born Abram in Ur of the Chaldeans, in Mesopotamia, around the early 2nd millennium BCE. Archaeologically, Ur was a significant Sumerian city, bustling with temples, trade, and culture. The narrative positions Abraham as a man who hears a divine call to leave behind the comforts of his homeland and journey toward a land promised by God, Canaan. Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. Genesis 12 verse 1. This command was more than migration, it was a covenantal moment, initiating a relationship between God and a chosen people. Abraham was promised descendants as numerous as the stars and a land where they would flourish. In return, Abraham and his family were to live differently, guided by the principles of this covenant. 3. The concept of covenant. The covenant, Hebrew, Brit, is central to Judaism and begins with Abraham. Unlike the contracts of kings or treaties between tribes, this covenant was deeply personal and spiritual. It signified a chosen relationship. God selects Abraham and his descendants. A divine promise, blessing, land, and prosperity. An obligation to walk with God in faithfulness and obedience. The covenant was marked by symbols and rituals, most notably circumcision, which became a lasting sign of belonging to this community. For the Israelites, this covenant made their story unique. They were not just another tribe among many, they were a people bound to God through a sacred pact. 4. Isaac and the continuity of the promise. Abraham's son Isaac embodies continuity. While Abraham's story is one of dramatic departure and divine encounters, Isaac's narrative is quieter, almost transitional. He inherits the covenant promises but lives within their unfolding rather than initiating new ones. His near sacrifice on Mount Moriah, when Abraham nearly offered him before God intervened, became a powerful symbol of faith and divine providence. For later Jewish tradition, this moment represented ultimate trust in God and the sanctity of life preserved by divine will. Isaac's story also reinforces the theme of chosenness. Abraham had other children, notably Ishmael, forefather of Arab peoples according to Islamic tradition, but Isaac was the bearer of the covenant line. This tension between Isaac and Ishmael foreshadows centuries of intertwined destinies between Jews and other Semitic peoples. 5. Jacob and the birth of Israel. The patriarchal saga culminates with Jacob, Isaac's son, who would later be renamed Israel. Jacob's story is one of struggle, transformation, and identity. He wrestles with his brother Esau, deceives and is deceived, and ultimately wrestles with a mysterious divine being, after which he receives the name Israel, meaning one who struggles with God. Jacob's significance lies not only in his personal story but in his descendants. His 12 sons become the progenitors of the 12 tribes of Israel. This marked a shift from a family-centered covenant to a tribal and national identity. From this point, Israelite history is not just about patriarchs but about a collective people. 6. The matriarchs, Sarah, Rebekah, Rachel, and Leah. Alongside the patriarchs, the matriarchs play a crucial role in shaping Israel's destiny. Sarah, Rebekah, Rachel, and Leah were not passive figures but active participants in the covenant story. Sarah's laughter at the promise of Isaac, Rebekah's decisive intervention in Jacob's blessing, and Rachel and Leah's roles in building Israel's lineage all demonstrate that the covenant was nurtured by both men and women. These narratives also highlight themes of fertility, barrenness, rivalry, and divine intervention, common concerns in the ancient Near East but uniquely tied to the unfolding Jewish identity. Each matriarch, in her struggles and triumphs, reflects the idea that the covenantal promise transcends human limitations and is guided by divine will. 7. Migration and nomadic roots. The patriarchs lived as semi-nomadic pastoralists, moving with their flocks across Canaan. This lifestyle shaped early Israelite identity. They were not tied to cities or temples but to tents and altars, carrying their God with them wherever they went. This would later distinguish them from neighboring peoples whose deities were tied to specific cities or shrines. The stories of Abraham bargaining for land, Jacob traveling to Haran, and Joseph eventually leading the family to Egypt reflect a constant theme of wandering. This wandering was not aimless but purposeful. It reflected a people in search of a promised destiny, sustained by faith rather than territory alone. 8. Emerging themes in early Judaism. Even in these early narratives, several key themes appear that would define Judaism for millennia. Monotheism, while not yet fully developed, the seeds of exclusive devotion to one God are present. Chosen people, the covenantal promise distinguished Israel from other nations. Land and exile, the promise of Canaan foreshadowed both attachment to and loss of land. Struggle and survival, the name Israel itself embodies the tension of wrestling with God and history. Faith as identity, unlike other peoples defined by kings or territory, Israel was defined by faith and covenant. 9. The legacy of the patriarchs. The patriarchs and matriarchs laid the foundation for Judaism. Their stories became not just historical accounts but sacred memory, retold in prayers, festivals, and rituals. Every Jewish generation since has looked back to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as not only ancestors but models of faith and perseverance. Later Jewish liturgy would constantly invoke them, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. This formula emphasized both continuity and individuality. Each patriarch experienced God uniquely, yet all were bound in a single covenant. 10. Setting the stage. As this first part draws to a close, we see that Judaism begins not with kings or empires but with a family, a covenant, and a journey. The patriarchs and matriarchs transformed the ordinary struggles of life, migration, fertility, sibling rivalry, and survival, into the raw material of sacred history. Their experiences forged the DNA of a people who would endure exile, persecution, and renewal for millennia. The next part of this series will move from patriarchal beginnings to the dramatic saga of Moses, the Exodus, and the covenant at Sinai, a moment when the faith of a family becomes the faith of a nation. Part 2, Exodus and Covenant, from Slavery to Nationhood. If the story of the patriarchs was about beginnings, migration, promises, and the birth of identity, the story of the Exodus represents transformation. It is here that the children of Israel, once a family descended from Jacob, become a people with a collective destiny. The Exodus from Egypt is not only the central narrative of the Hebrew Bible but the theological cornerstone of Judaism. It represents liberation, revelation, and covenant, the defining triad that shapes Jewish memory and practice forever. 1. The descent into Egypt. The story begins with Joseph, Jacob's favored son, sold into slavery by his jealous brothers. Through resilience and divine providence, Joseph rose to prominence in Egypt, becoming an advisor to Pharaoh. When famine struck Canaan, Jacob's family migrated to Egypt, where Joseph secured their survival. What began as refuge eventually turned into oppression. Generations later, the Israelites were enslaved, subjected to harsh labor, and feared as a growing minority. This tension, prosperity followed by persecution, would become a recurring motif in Jewish history. 2. The birth of Moses. Amid this oppression, a child was born who would become the liberator, Moses. Saved from Pharaoh's decree to kill Hebrew infants, he was raised in the Egyptian court yet remained connected to his people. His flight into Midian after killing an Egyptian overseer seemed to mark an exile from destiny, but it was there, at the burning bush on Mount Horeb, that Moses encountered the God of his ancestors. God revealed the divine name, YHWH, a name that signified being itself, I am who I am. This revelation marked a deepening of monotheism, distinguishing the God of Israel as not just a tribal deity but the eternal, universal creator. 3. Liberation from Egypt. The struggle between Moses and Pharaoh became a cosmic drama of divine power versus earthly might. Through plagues, each targeting Egyptian deities and natural forces, God demonstrated sovereignty over creation. The final plague, the death of the firstborn, was both devastating and redemptive. The Israelites, marking their doors with lamb's blood, were spared. This moment became the foundation of Passover, Pesach, the most enduring Jewish festival of liberation. The Exodus itself, the crossing of the Sea of Reeds, became the ultimate symbol of salvation. Pursued by Pharaoh's army, the Israelites passed through the parted waters, while their oppressors were engulfed. This event established the central Jewish belief that God intervenes in history for the sake of the people. 4. Wilderness wanderings. Liberation was not the end but the beginning of struggle. Freed from slavery, the Israelites faced the barren wilderness. They grappled with hunger, thirst, and uncertainty. Manna from heaven and water from rocks sustained them, yet their faith wavered. Rebellion, nostalgia for Egypt, and fear of enemies plagued the journey. The wilderness period revealed a paradox. While freedom is a gift, it also demands responsibility. The Israelites had left Egypt physically, but Egypt lingered in their hearts. The journey through the desert symbolized the transformation of a people from dependency into maturity, preparing them for covenantal life. 5. Sinai and the Covenant. The climax of the Exodus narrative is the revelation at Mount Sinai. Gathered at the foot of the mountain, the Israelites experienced thunder, lightning, and divine presence. It was here that they received the Torah, most famously, the Ten Commandments, Aseret HaDibrit. The Ten Commandments transcended ritual and addressed the moral fabric of society, honoring parents, prohibiting murder, theft, adultery, false witness, and coveting. The first commands emphasized exclusive devotion to God, rejecting idolatry. This moment established Judaism not merely as a tribal identity but as an ethical monotheism. The covenant at Sinai formalized what began with Abraham. Israel was chosen not only to receive blessing but to embody holiness and justice in the world. The people responded, "All that the Lord has spoken we will do." This declaration became the foundation of Jewish communal identity. 6. The Golden Calf and Covenant Renewal. Yet even at the height of revelation, human weakness surfaced. When Moses delayed on the mountain, the people constructed a golden calf, a return to idolatry. This betrayal nearly shattered the covenant. Moses pleaded with God to forgive the people, and the covenant was renewed. This episode underscores the tension at the heart of Judaism. The people are chosen, yet fallible. Their relationship with God is enduring, but not without conflict and repentance. This dynamic, sin, judgment, forgiveness, and renewal would echo through Jewish history and liturgy. 7. Laws and holiness. Beyond the Ten Commandments, the Torah at Sinai included a vast collection of laws, civil, ritual, ethical, and cultic. These laws distinguished Israel from surrounding nations. Dietary practices, kashrut, Sabbath observance, festivals, and purity laws created a rhythm of life centered on holiness. The Holiness Code, particularly in Leviticus, emphasized that Israel was to be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. This holiness was not separation for its own sake but service, to embody justice, care for the stranger, and fidelity to God. 8. The Tabernacle, God dwelling among the people. A major outcome of Sinai was the command to build the Mishkan, tabernacle, a portable sanctuary where God's presence would dwell among the Israelites. Unlike Egyptian temples of stone, the tabernacle was movable, reflecting a God who accompanied his people. The Ark of the Covenant, containing the tablets of the law, became the centerpiece of divine presence. The priests, descended from Aaron, mediated rituals, sacrifices, and festivals. This established both religious hierarchy and communal participation in worship. 9. The 40-year sojourn. The Israelites' journey to the Promised Land, which could have taken months, extended into 40 years due to their lack of faith and repeated rebellions. Generations died in the wilderness. A new generation, born in freedom, would enter Canaan. This period forged resilience. The wilderness became a place of testing, but also of intimacy with God. Later prophets and poets would look back on the wilderness as both hardship and honeymoon, the formative years of Israel's covenantal life. 10. The legacy of the Exodus. The Exodus is not simply a historical episode, it is the defining narrative of Judaism. It established God as Redeemer, a God who liberates the oppressed. Israel as a nation, transformed from family into peoplehood. Torah as constitution, a legal and moral framework for life. Memory as identity, Passover and continual retelling ensure that every generation experiences liberation as if they themselves left Egypt. The Exodus story became a model for later struggles. From Babylonian exile to modern Jewish emancipation, the memory of Egypt has inspired resilience and hope. Even beyond Judaism, it influenced Christianity, Islam, and liberation movements worldwide. 11. Setting the stage. With the Exodus and Sinai Covenant, Judaism entered a new phase, from patriarchal promises to national law. The people were no longer wanderers alone but a covenantal community bound by Torah. Their destiny lay not only in land but in living out divine justice and holiness. The next chapter in this saga will focus on conquest and kingship, how Israel transitioned from a nomadic tribal federation into a settled people under judges and eventually kings, facing the challenges of land, power, and faithfulness. Part 3. Conquest and Kingship, from Tribal Federation to United Monarchy. The Exodus and Sinai Covenant transformed a family of tribes into a nation bound by divine law. But law alone does not make a people secure. The next chapter of Jewish history unfolds in the struggle to claim the Promised Land, establish political structures, and grapple with the temptations and responsibilities of kingship. This era, beginning with Joshua's conquest, continuing through the Judges, and culminating in the rise of the monarchy, set the stage for Israel's greatest triumphs and deepest tensions. It is a story of settlement, unity, division, and the ongoing negotiation between divine authority and human power. 1. Crossing the Jordan and conquest under Joshua. After 40 years in the wilderness, the Israelites finally stood at the threshold of Canaan. Under Joshua, successor to Moses, the tribes prepared to cross the Jordan River. This crossing echoed the Red Sea miracle. The waters parted, symbolizing that God's presence continued to guide them. The first major battle was at Jericho. The walls fell after 7 days of ritual marches and trumpet blasts, showing that victory came not by might alone but through divine power. Other campaigns followed, Ai, Hazor, and the southern and northern coalitions. Yet archaeological and historical debates suggest a more complex reality. Rather than a single sweeping conquest, the settlement may have occurred gradually, through both conflict and assimilation. Regardless of historical detail, the biblical narrative portrays Joshua's leadership as divinely ordained, emphasizing fidelity to Torah as the true key to success. 2. The allotment of the land. Following conquest, the land was divided among the 12 tribes. Each received territory, though the Levites were given cities rather than land, as their inheritance was religious service. The land division emphasized that possession was conditional. Israel held Canaan not by right of conquest but as a divine gift, contingent on covenant faithfulness. This notion of land as gift would profoundly shape Jewish theology, especially during later exiles when possession of land was lost but hope for restoration remained alive. 3. The era of the Judges. After Joshua's death, Israel entered the period of the Judges, a loose confederation of tribes without centralized government. Judges were not kings but charismatic leaders, warriors, prophets, or deliverers, raised up by God during crises. Prominent judges included Deborah, a prophetess and military leader who defeated Canaanite oppression. Gideon, who triumphed against the Midianites with a small force, demonstrating reliance on God. Jephthah, whose tragic vow revealed the cost of rash leadership. Samson, whose strength symbolized Israel's potential but whose weakness for foreign entanglements foreshadowed trouble. The book of Judges describes a cycle. Israel sinned, suffered oppression, cried out, and was delivered. The refrain, "In those days there was no king in Israel, everyone did what was right in their own eyes," pointed to the need for stable leadership. 4. The Philistine challenge and the rise of kingship. By the 11th century BCE, Israel faced a new threat, the Philistines, a technologically advanced people with iron weapons and coastal strongholds. The decentralized tribal system could not withstand them. The people clamored for a king, like other nations. The prophet Samuel resisted, warning that kings would exploit the people and encroach on divine sovereignty. Yet God permitted the request, and Saul was anointed as Israel's first king. His reign began with promise, uniting the tribes and winning victories. But Saul's disobedience, failing to fully carry out divine commands, led to his rejection. This tension between prophet and king would define Israelite politics. Kings wielded power, but prophets reminded them of covenant obligations. 5. David, the shepherd king. Saul's successor was David, the shepherd from Bethlehem who defeated Goliath and captured the people's imagination. His reign, circa 1000 BCE, represented the high point of Israel's monarchy. David unified the tribes, defeated enemies, and captured Jerusalem, making it the political and spiritual capital. The Ark of the Covenant was brought there, establishing Jerusalem as the city of God. David's dynasty was promised an eternal covenant, "Your house and your kingdom shall endure forever." Yet David was not flawless. His sin with Bathsheba and the arranged death of her husband, Uriah, led to family turmoil and rebellion. The prophet Nathan condemned him, demonstrating that even the greatest king was accountable to God. David remained central in Jewish memory, poet, warrior, and psalmist. His legacy inspired messianic hope for a future descendant who would restore Israel. 6. Solomon. Wisdom and the Temple. David's son Solomon inherited a strong kingdom and brought it to unprecedented glory. Renowned for wisdom, Solomon presided over prosperity, trade, and cultural exchange. His crowning achievement was building the first temple in Jerusalem, a permanent house for God's presence. The temple became the center of Jewish worship, with sacrifices, festivals, and priestly rituals binding the nation together. It symbolized permanence, unlike the portable tabernacle. Yet Solomon's reign also sowed seeds of decline. His many foreign marriages introduced idolatry, and heavy taxation burdened the people. His grandeur created fissures between north and south. 7. The theology of kingship. The monarchy raised profound theological questions. Was kingship a betrayal of divine rule, or a means of fulfilling it? The Bible presents both views. Kings were necessary for stability and defense, yet their power was limited by Torah. Prophets like Samuel, Nathan, Elijah, and others served as checks against royal overreach. This balance, earthly authority under divine law, would influence Jewish political thought for centuries, shaping ideas of accountability and justice. 8. The seeds of division. After Solomon's death, the kingdom fractured. Northern tribes resented Judah's dominance and heavy taxation. This split, into the kingdom of Israel, north, and the kingdom of Judah, south, would shape Jewish destiny for centuries. But before exploring division and exile, the united monarchy must be remembered as the Golden Age, a time of unity, land, and temple worship, when the promises to Abraham seemed fulfilled. 9. Legacy of the period. The conquest and monarchy left enduring marks. Land and peoplehood, settlement in Canaan fulfilled ancestral promises. Jerusalem became the eternal capital and spiritual center. Davidic covenant inspired messianic hope. Temple worship established centralized rituals of sacrifice and pilgrimage. Prophetic accountability demonstrated that no ruler was above divine law. This period showed both the heights of unity and the seeds of disintegration. It was a time when Israel matured politically but faced the dangers of power, wealth, and complacency. 10. Looking ahead. The next chapter in Jewish history will address division and prophets, how the united monarchy split, how prophets rose to challenge kings, and how exile loomed as both tragedy and theological turning point. Part 4. Division, Prophets, and Exile. The golden age of David and Solomon could not last forever. The unity of Israel was fragile, strained by tribal rivalries, social inequities, and competing visions of leadership. With Solomon's death around 930 BCE, the kingdom fractured, and the stage was set for centuries of political turmoil, prophetic outcry, and eventual exile. This was a period of deep crisis, but also one of spiritual growth. The voices of the prophets rose to articulate what it meant to remain faithful to God amid disunity, corruption, and foreign domination. Out of loss came new forms of resilience that would sustain Judaism for millennia. 1. The division of the kingdom. Solomon's wealth and grandeur had come at a cost. Heavy taxes and forced labor bred resentment, especially in the northern tribes. His son, Rehoboam, inherited the throne but rejected pleas for leniency. In response, 10 tribes revolted under Jeroboam, forming the kingdom of Israel in the north. Only Judah and Benjamin remained loyal to the Davidic dynasty in the south, creating the kingdom of Judah. Israel, north larger, wealthier, with Samaria as capital. Politically unstable, plagued by coups and dynastic struggles. Judah, south smaller, centered on Jerusalem and the temple. Though more stable, it was not immune to corruption and foreign influence. The split fractured religious life too. Jeroboam established rival sanctuaries at Bethel and Dan, fearing pilgrimages to Jerusalem would undermine his rule. This was seen as a betrayal of exclusive devotion to the God of Israel. 2. The role of the prophets. It was during this fractured era that prophets emerged as central figures. They were not fortune-tellers but divine messengers, calling kings and people back to covenant faithfulness. Northern prophets. Elijah confronted King Ahab and Queen Jezebel, challenging Baal worship on Mount Carmel with fire from heaven. His courage symbolized resistance to idolatry. Elisha, his successor, performed miracles and counseled kings, blending compassion with uncompromising devotion. Writing prophets. Later, prophets began recording their messages, leaving texts that would shape Jewish scripture. Amos, a shepherd from Judah, denounced Israel's wealth and social injustice, declaring God desired righteousness more than ritual. Hosea used his own broken marriage as metaphor for Israel's unfaithfulness to God, yet promised divine compassion. These prophets revealed that national security was not guaranteed by military strength but by ethical and spiritual fidelity. 3. Assyrian domination and the fall of Israel. By the 8th century BCE, the mighty Assyrian Empire expanded westward. Israel, caught between empires, suffered greatly. Prophets like Amos and Hosea warned that corruption and idolatry would bring downfall. In 722 BCE, Assyria conquered Samaria, destroying the northern kingdom. Many Israelites were deported, becoming the so-called 10 lost tribes. Though some remnants survived, the northern kingdom never recovered. This catastrophe shocked Judah, reinforcing Jerusalem's sense of chosenness, but also sowing seeds of complacency. Some believed the Davidic dynasty and temple would protect them from similar fate. 4. Judah's struggles and reform. Judah survived longer but faced its own crises. Some kings, like Hezekiah, sought reform, resisting Assyria and promoting exclusive worship of God. The prophet Isaiah reassured that God would protect Jerusalem, yet also warned against arrogance. Later, King Josiah initiated sweeping reforms after discovering a book of the law, likely part of Deuteronomy. He centralized worship in Jerusalem and renewed covenantal faith. Josiah's reign seemed like a revival of David's ideals, but his death in battle dashed hopes of lasting reform. 5. Babylon and the fall of Jerusalem. By the 6th century BCE, Assyria declined, and Babylon rose under Nebuchadnezzar. Judah became a vassal but rebelled, trusting in Egypt's help and divine protection. The prophet Jeremiah, however, urged submission, declaring the exile was God's judgment. In 586 BCE, Babylon destroyed Jerusalem, burned the temple, and deported elites to Babylon. This was the greatest catastrophe in Jewish history up to that point, the loss of land, king, and sanctuary. Psalm 137 captured the anguish. By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down and wept, when we remembered Zion. 6. Theological transformation in exile. Exile forced profound reflection. How could God's chosen people lose their land and temple? Prophets provided answers. Jeremiah promised a new covenant, written on hearts, not just stone. Ezekiel envisioned God's glory leaving the temple but also promised restoration and a new heart of flesh. 2nd Isaiah spoke of consolation, declaring Israel a light to the nations. Exile deepened Jewish spirituality, shifting emphasis from land and monarchy to Torah, prayer, and hope. Synagogues began to emerge as places of study and worship, sowing seeds for future Jewish life. 7. Identity in crisis. In exile, Jews faced assimilation pressures. Some adapted to Babylonian life, even prospering, while others clung fiercely to distinct practices, Sabbath, circumcision, and dietary laws, as markers of identity. This preservation of covenantal distinctiveness ensured survival without sovereignty. The exile also expanded Jewish imagination. With empire all around, Jews pondered their role in the wider world. Was their suffering meaningless, or did it serve divine purpose? The hope for a messianic restoration of David's line grew stronger. 8. Legacy of division and exile. This era left permanent marks. The 10 lost tribes became a mystery, symbolizing the fragility of nationhood. Prophets established a canon of moral and spiritual authority, shaping scripture. Exile transformed Judaism into a portable faith, not tied exclusively to land or temple. Messianic hope deepened, awaiting future redemption. The loss was devastating, but it birthed a resilience that would define Jewish survival across centuries. 9. Looking ahead. The story does not end in Babylon. The next phase would bring Persian rule and return, when Cyrus the Great allowed Jews to go back to their homeland, rebuild the temple, and redefine their identity in a new age of empire and diaspora. Part 5. Return and Second Temple Judaism. The Babylonian exile was a crisis of unparalleled magnitude for the Jewish people. Yet within just a few decades, history shifted in a way no one could have predicted. A new empire rose, Babylon fell, and the Jewish exiles were granted the chance to return to their homeland. This return, though filled with hope, was also fraught with challenges. Out of it emerged what historians call the Second Temple period, an age that redefined Jewish religious, cultural, and political life. 1. The rise of Persia and the Edict of Cyrus. In 539 BCE, the Babylonian Empire fell to the Persians under Cyrus the Great. Unlike the Babylonians, the Persians pursued a policy of tolerance toward subject peoples. They allowed exiled communities to return to their homelands and rebuild their temples. The Edict of Cyrus, recorded in both the Hebrew Bible, Ezra 1, and archaeological inscriptions, permitted Jews to return to Judah and reconstruct the temple in Jerusalem. For Jews, Cyrus was seen as a divinely appointed figure, even called God's anointed, Isaiah 45 verse 1. 2. The return to Jerusalem. Thousands of Jews made the journey back from Babylon, though many stayed behind, beginning the first lasting Jewish diaspora. Those who returned found devastation. Jerusalem was in ruins, fields lay barren, and the once proud temple was gone. Leaders like Zerubbabel, a descendant of David, and Joshua the high priest oversaw the reconstruction. By 515 BCE, the Second Temple was completed. Though less grand than Solomon's temple, it became the new spiritual center of Judaism. 3. Ezra, Nehemiah, and the Torah. The return was not just physical but spiritual. Two key figures, Ezra and Nehemiah, reshaped Jewish identity. Ezra, a scribe and priest, emphasized Torah study and public reading of the law. His reforms promoted endogamy, Sabbath observance, and strict adherence to covenantal law. Nehemiah, serving as governor under Persian authority, rebuilt Jerusalem's walls and strengthened communal identity. Together, they elevated the Torah as the central authority of Jewish life, laying the foundation for Judaism as a religion of the book. 4. The Second Temple and new institutions. The rebuilt temple restored sacrificial worship, but the exile had permanently changed Jewish practice. Synagogues, which had emerged in Babylon as places of study and prayer, remained essential. The combination of temple ritual and synagogue learning gave Judaism resilience and adaptability. Priests retained authority in the temple, but scribes and teachers of the law, later known as rabbis, gained influence in daily life. Judaism was beginning to shift from a cult centered on sacrifice to a faith centered on Torah and interpretation. 5. Life under Persian rule. Under Persian administration, Jews enjoyed relative autonomy. They were part of the vast satrapy of, beyond the river, but governed their internal affairs through priests and elders. This was the beginning of Jewish life lived under imperial rule, a pattern that would continue under Greeks, Romans, and beyond. The Persian period also fostered new theological ideas. Greater emphasis on monotheism, God as universal, not only tribal. Development of apocalyptic thought, imagining cosmic battles between good and evil. Strengthening of messianic hopes for a Davidic restoration. 6. The growing diaspora. While Jerusalem was restored, not all Jews returned. Large communities thrived in Babylon, Persia, and eventually Egypt. Diaspora Jews often lived between two worlds, balancing loyalty to local rulers with devotion to their ancestral faith. This dual identity would become a hallmark of Jewish history. 7. Cultural shifts and identity boundaries. The post-exilic community became more cautious about assimilation. Marriages with outsiders were discouraged, dietary laws were reinforced, and the Sabbath was more strictly observed. This sharpened Jewish distinctiveness, but also sparked internal debates about inclusion versus separation. Prophets like Haggai, Zechariah, and later Malachi guided the people, urging faithfulness and envisioning a future when God's glory would fill the restored temple. 8. Seeds of sectarianism. Even at this early stage, divisions emerged. Some saw Ezra's reforms as too strict, others as not strict enough. The tensions between priests, scribes, and common people sowed seeds of later sectarian movements, Pharisees, Sadducees, Essenes, and others, that would flourish in the Second Temple's final centuries. 9. Legacy of the Return. The Return and Second Temple period left deep and lasting legacies. the temple was restored as the heart of Jewish worship. The Torah became the constitution of Jewish life. Synagogues emerged as parallel centers of community. Diaspora life became a permanent reality, not just an exile. Judaism became more text-centered, resilient, and portable. 10. Looking ahead. This was only the beginning. Within a century, a new empire would rise, the Greeks under Alexander the Great, bringing Hellenistic culture and new tensions. Judaism would adapt once more, navigating foreign influence, resistance, and renewal. Part 6. Hellenistic Judaism and the Maccabean Revolt. When Alexander the Great swept through the Near East in the late 4th century BCE, he reshaped the world forever. His conquest spread Hellenism, the culture, language, and philosophy of Greece, across the eastern Mediterranean and beyond. For the Jewish people, this ushered in both opportunities and crises. Some embraced Greek culture, blending it with Jewish traditions, while others resisted, seeing it as a threat to covenantal faithfulness. Out of this tension came one of the most dramatic episodes in Jewish history, the Maccabean Revolt. This uprising was not only about national independence, but also about preserving Jewish identity in the face of assimilation and coercion. 1. Alexander the Great and the spread of Hellenism. In 332 BCE, Alexander conquered the Persian Empire, including Judah. Though he died young, his empire introduced Greek influence everywhere: language, art, theater, philosophy, and architecture. Greek cities, polis, sprang up, and Greek became the lingua franca of the eastern Mediterranean. For Jews, this was the beginning of Hellenistic Judaism, where Greek and Jewish cultures met. 2. Jewish life under the successor kingdoms. After Alexander's death, his generals divided the empire. Judah, often called Judea, was caught between the Ptolemies of Egypt and the Seleucids of Syria. Under the Ptolemies, 323 to 200 BCE, Jews enjoyed relative stability. Alexandria in Egypt became home to a huge Jewish community, producing the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible. Under the Seleucids, 200 to 164 BCE, tensions escalated. Hellenization became more aggressive, especially under Antiochus IV Epiphanes, who sought to unify his empire through Greek religion and culture. 3. The appeal of Hellenism. Many Jews found aspects of Greek culture appealing. Gymnasiums, theaters, and new philosophical ideas offered intellectual and social opportunities. Some Jewish elites sought to modernize Judaism, adopting Greek names, clothing, and customs. This created sharp divisions. Hellenizers embraced assimilation. Traditionalists resisted, fearing covenantal compromise. The stage was set for a cultural and religious clash. 4. Antiochus IV and religious persecution. Around 167 BCE, Antiochus IV launched policies that Jews saw as intolerable. He outlawed Torah observance, Sabbath, and circumcision. He desecrated the temple, erecting an altar to Zeus and sacrificing pigs, the abomination of desolation. Copies of the Torah were burned, violators were executed. For traditional Jews, this was not just political oppression but a direct assault on their covenant with God. 5. The spark of revolt. Resistance began in Modian, a small town near Jerusalem. A priest named Mattathias refused to offer pagan sacrifices. When another Jew stepped forward to comply, Mattathias killed him, sparking open rebellion. He and his sons fled to the hills, rallying followers. After Mattathias' death, leadership passed to his son Judah Maccabee, the Hammer. 6. The Maccabean Revolt. Judah Maccabee and his brothers led a guerrilla war against the Seleucid forces. Though vastly outnumbered, they used knowledge of the terrain and religious zeal to win key victories. By 164 BCE, they recaptured Jerusalem, purified the temple, and rededicated it to God. This event is commemorated in Hanukkah, the festival of lights, celebrating the miracle of the temple menorah burning for 8 days with a single day's supply of oil. 7. The Hasmonean dynasty. After Judah's death, his brothers continued the struggle, eventually establishing an independent Jewish state under the Hasmonean dynasty, named for their ancestor, Hasmon. For the first time since the Babylonian conquest, Judea was sovereign again. The Hasmonean rulers expanded territory, enforced Jewish law, and sometimes imposed Judaism on conquered peoples. Yet they also adopted aspects of Hellenistic kingship, blending Greek and Jewish practices. 8. Religious and cultural consequences. The revolt had lasting effects. Judaism survived in the face of forced assimilation. Jewish independence rekindled messianic hopes. Tensions between Hellenizers and traditionalists persisted. Sectarian divisions, Pharisees, Sadducees, Essenes, deepened in the following century. The revolt was remembered as a triumph of faith over tyranny, inspiring later Jewish resistance movements. 9. Diaspora responses. While Judea fought for independence, diaspora Jews had their own experiences. In Alexandria, Jewish life thrived under Ptolemaic and later Roman rule. Greek-speaking Jews produced literature blending biblical themes with Greek philosophy, like the works of Philo of Alexandria. This diversity revealed the adaptability of Judaism, but also foreshadowed challenges of maintaining unity across dispersed communities. 10. Legacy of the Maccabees. The Maccabean revolt became a symbol of Jewish courage and divine deliverance. Hanukkah liturgy still praises God for delivering the many into the hands of the few. At the same time, the Hasmonean dynasty's later corruption and power struggles revealed the complexities of sovereignty. Independence brought both pride and division. 11. Looking ahead. The Hasmonean state would eventually collapse under Roman pressure, but the struggle of the Maccabees shaped Jewish identity for centuries. It demonstrated that faith could endure foreign domination and that resistance, whether military, spiritual, or cultural, was integral to Jewish survival. The next chapter of Jewish history would see Rome dominate Judea, setting the stage for Herod, sectarianism, and ultimately the destruction of the Second Temple. Part 7. Rome and the Rise of Jewish Sects. By the mid-2nd century BCE, the Jewish people found themselves under a new and powerful master, Rome. The Hasmonean kingdom, born of the Maccabean revolt, had enjoyed a period of independence, but its internal struggles and external pressures eventually drew the attention of the Roman Republic. Rome's arrival in Judea marked the beginning of profound political, cultural, and religious transformations, setting the stage for both tragedy and resilience. This period also saw the emergence of major Jewish sects, Pharisees, Sadducees, Essenes, and Zealots, that responded differently to Roman rule, Hellenistic influence, and questions of law, purity, and messianic hope. Their debates and divisions would shape Jewish thought and identity, with repercussions still felt today. 1. Rome's expansion into Judea. In 63 BCE, the Roman general Pompey entered Jerusalem after a Hasmonean civil war between rival brothers, Hyrcanus II and Aristobulus II. Rome installed Hyrcanus as high priest but reduced Judea to a client kingdom. This ended true Jewish sovereignty, though the Hasmoneans continued in diminished form. Over time, Rome tightened control. By 37 BCE, with Roman backing, Herod the Great took power, ruling as King of the Jews under Rome's authority. 2. Herod the Great. Herod, ruled 37–4 BCE, was a brilliant yet ruthless ruler. Though not of full Jewish descent, his family were Idumeans. He secured his throne with Roman approval. His reign was marked by both grandeur and brutality. Achievements. Rebuilt the temple in Jerusalem, creating one of the most magnificent structures of the ancient world. Founded cities, fortresses, and aqueducts. Encouraged commerce and cultural life. Brutality. Known for paranoia, he executed rivals, including members of his own family. His rule deepened divisions within Jewish society. While admired for his architectural feats, many Jews resented his closeness to Rome and his questionable Jewish lineage. 3. After Herod, Roman governors and rising tensions. Upon Herod's death, his kingdom was divided among his sons. Misrule and unrest led Rome to impose direct rule through governors, procurators. These officials often exploited the population, fueling resentment. Roman taxation, the presence of pagan symbols, and occasional desecration of sacred practices all contributed to rising tensions between Jews and their imperial overlords. 4. Jewish sects of the Second Temple period. During this turbulent time, Jewish society became fragmented into competing sects, each with distinct interpretations of law, identity, and hope. A. Pharisees emphasized Torah study and the oral law, later codified in the Mishnah. Believed in resurrection of the dead and angels. Popular among common people, they emphasized personal piety and synagogue worship. Their legacy would shape Rabbinic Judaism. B. Sadducees associated with the temple priesthood and aristocracy. Rejected oral traditions, angels, and resurrection, focused only on the written Torah. Wealthy and politically aligned with Rome, but less popular among the masses. C. Essenes, a separatist group, possibly linked to the community at Qumran, near the Dead Sea. Practiced strict purity laws, communal living, and apocalyptic expectation. Produced the Dead Sea Scrolls, offering insight into their beliefs and biblical texts. D. Zealots, a militant faction advocating violent resistance against Rome. Saw Roman occupation as intolerable and believed armed struggle was the path to deliverance. Their influence would grow, culminating in revolt. 5. Apocalyptic hope and messianic movements. Amid oppression, apocalyptic literature flourished, e.g., the Book of Daniel, later texts like 1 Enoch. Many Jews longed for divine intervention to overthrow Rome and restore God's kingdom. Messianic movements arose, some peaceful, others militant, reflecting deep yearnings for redemption. 6. The Temple and Synagogue. The Jerusalem Temple remained the center of Jewish worship, with pilgrims from across the diaspora offering sacrifices. Yet the synagogue was becoming increasingly important as a place of study, prayer, and community, especially for Jews living outside Judea. This dual structure allowed Judaism to survive even after the temple's eventual destruction. 7. Diaspora Judaism under Rome. Large Jewish communities flourished in Alexandria, Antioch, Babylon, and Rome itself. The Septuagint continued to be widely used among Greek-speaking Jews. Diaspora Jews maintained ties to Jerusalem but also adapted to local cultures, contributing to trade, philosophy, and civic life. The diaspora experience broadened Jewish identity, making it global rather than confined to Judea. 8. Seeds of conflict. By the early 1st century CE, tensions with Rome escalated. Mismanagement by governors like Pontius Pilate, heavy taxation, and Roman disrespect for Jewish religion pushed Judea toward open revolt. The diversity of Jewish sects, Pharisees emphasizing study, Sadducees tied to the temple, Essenes withdrawing, and Zealots plotting rebellion, meant there was no unified response. Yet the desire for freedom was strong. 9. Legacy of the period. The Roman era and the rise of sects left enduring legacies. The Pharisees laid the foundation for Rabbinic Judaism after the temple's fall. The Sadducees, tied to the temple, largely vanished after 70 CE. The Essenes influenced later mystical and apocalyptic traditions. The Zealots' revolt led to catastrophe but inspired Jewish resistance throughout history. 10. Looking ahead. The story of Rome and the Jewish people would soon reach a breaking point. In 66 CE, rebellion erupted, the first Jewish revolt. The destruction of the Second Temple in 70 CE would mark one of the greatest turning points in Jewish history, forcing the people to adapt and redefine their identity in exile and survival. Part 8. The First Jewish Revolt and the Destruction of the Second Temple. By the middle of the 1st century CE, relations between the Jewish population of Judea and their Roman overlords had become increasingly strained. Years of political corruption, economic exploitation, religious tension, and nationalistic fervor came to a head in 66 CE, sparking the first Jewish revolt. This uprising would lead to one of the greatest tragedies in Jewish history, the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 CE. The revolt, however, was not just a simple war of independence. It was also a reflection of divisions within Jewish society, differing visions of identity and faith, and the tension between adaptation to empire and resistance to oppression. 1. Background to the revolt. A. Roman oppression. Roman procurators often abused their power. Governors like Pontius Pilate had already angered Jews decades earlier, and by the 60s CE, their successors continued the pattern of heavy taxation, bribery, and sacrilege. One of the worst was Gessius Florus, 64 to 66 CE, whose greed and brutality provoked widespread outrage. He stole temple funds and mocked Jewish customs, sparking open rebellion. B. Social tensions. The population was divided between aristocratic elites, often Sadducees, who cooperated with Rome. Commoners and peasants suffering under taxation and poverty. Zealots who preached violent resistance. The poor often looked to messianic hopes, while the elites tried to preserve stability under Rome. C. Religious fervor. Apocalyptic expectations were widespread. Many believed that God would soon intervene to overthrow Rome, with the Messiah leading Israel to freedom. 2. Outbreak of the revolt, 66 CE. In 66 CE, riots broke out in Jerusalem when Florus attempted to seize wealth from the temple. The rebels expelled Roman troops and gained temporary control of the city. The revolt spread quickly across Judea, with zealot factions taking strongholds like Masada and Gamla. At first, the rebellion achieved surprising success, even defeating a Roman legion under Cestius Gallus. This emboldened the rebels but also drew the full might of Rome against them. 3. Rome strikes back. The Roman general Vespasian, later emperor, was tasked with crushing the rebellion. With his son Titus, he launched a systematic campaign. Cities in Galilee, like Hodapata, fell, with brutal massacres. The Jewish historian Josephus, who fought at Hodapata, was captured and later became a chronicler of the war. By 68 CE, most of Judea outside Jerusalem was subdued. The rebellion was already fracturing, with rival Jewish factions inside Jerusalem fighting one another as much as Rome. 4. The Siege of Jerusalem, 70 CE. In 70 CE, Titus laid siege to Jerusalem. The city was divided between competing groups. Zealots, Sicarii, moderates, who destroyed each other's food supplies in civil war, worsening famine. The siege was brutal. Roman battering rams and siege towers pounded the walls. Disease and starvation ravaged the population. The temple, the holiest site in Judaism, became the central symbol of resistance. In August 70 CE, the Romans breached the defenses. Despite Titus allegedly wishing to preserve the temple, Roman soldiers set it ablaze. The Second Temple was destroyed, along with much of Jerusalem. 5. Aftermath of the temple's destruction. The destruction was catastrophic. Tens of thousands were killed, survivors were enslaved or dispersed. The temple priesthood, central to Jewish worship, effectively ended. The Sadducees, tied to temple rituals, disappeared from history. Judaism had to reorient itself away from sacrificial worship toward study, prayer, and community life. This transformation, led by the Pharisees and later Rabbinic Judaism, ensured Jewish survival without the temple. 6. The fall of Masada, 73 CE. Though Jerusalem fell in 70 CE, resistance continued in strongholds like Masada, a desert fortress overlooking the Dead Sea. The Zealots under Eleazar ben Yair held out until 73 CE. According to Josephus, when the Romans breached the fortress, the defenders committed mass suicide rather than surrender. Whether entirely factual or not, Masada became a lasting symbol of Jewish resistance and sacrifice. 7. The diaspora expands. In the aftermath, many Jews were exiled, enslaved, or scattered throughout the Roman Empire. The Jewish diaspora expanded dramatically, with communities from Babylon to Alexandria to Rome itself. Jerusalem was left in ruins, a reminder of Rome's dominance. 8. Legacy of the Revolt. The First Jewish Revolt and the Temple's destruction reshaped Judaism forever. Judaism without the Temple. Sacrificial worship ended, replaced by prayer, Torah study, and synagogue life. Rabbinic Judaism emerges, Pharisaic traditions became the foundation for the future. National identity. Despite defeat, Jewish identity remained tied to hope for restoration. Memory of resistance. The revolt became a symbol of both courage and tragedy. 9. Looking ahead. Although crushed, Jewish resistance did not end. Later uprisings, including the Bar Kokhba revolt, 132 to 135 CE, would again test Rome's power and further define Jewish destiny. But the destruction of the Second Temple remains one of the defining moments in Jewish history, commemorated every year on Tisha B'Av, the Day of Mourning. Part 9. Rabbinic Judaism and the Shaping of Jewish Life After the Temple. The destruction of the Second Temple in 70 CE left Judaism at a crossroads. With the priesthood gone, sacrificial rituals impossible, and Jerusalem devastated, the Jewish people faced an existential question: how could they maintain their faith and communal identity without the temple at its center? The answer came in the form of a radical but enduring transformation. Under the leadership of scholars, sages, and rabbis, Judaism shifted from a temple-centered religion of sacrifice to a text-centered religion of study, prayer, and law. This transition gave rise to Rabbinic Judaism, which has defined Jewish life for nearly 2 millennia. 1. From temple to text. A. Loss of the priesthood. The Sadducees, who had been tied to temple rituals, largely disappeared after 70 CE. Their authority vanished with the temple's destruction. In contrast, the Pharisees, who emphasized oral law, synagogues, and study of the Torah, were better suited to adapt. They became the foundation of Rabbinic Judaism. B. Rise of the synagogue. Even before the destruction, synagogues existed as local centers of prayer and learning. After 70 CE, they became the central institutions of Jewish life. Instead of offering animal sacrifices, Jews gathered for prayer, Torah readings, and teaching. This shift democratized Judaism. Any community with a quorum, a minyan of 10 men, could worship together, without priests or temple rituals. 2. Jabna and the birth of rabbinic authority. After the fall of Jerusalem, the sage Rabban Yohanan ben Zakkai fled the city and was granted permission by the Romans to establish an academy in Jabna. This became the new center of Jewish leadership. At Jabna, rabbis debated and codified Jewish law, set rules for worship, and preserved traditions. They created liturgical prayers to substitute for temple sacrifices, such as the Amidah, still central to Jewish prayer today. The academy at Jabna also established the principle that Torah study and observance, not temple sacrifices, would be the essence of Jewish life. 3. The Mishnah, preserving the oral law. For centuries, Jewish tradition had maintained an oral law, interpretations and applications of the Torah passed down by word of mouth. After the destruction of the temple, rabbis feared this knowledge might be lost. Around 200 CE, Rabbi Judah Hanasi, Judah the Prince, compiled and edited the Mishnah, a monumental work of law, ethics, and practice. The Mishnah organized Jewish law into 6 orders, sectors of life, agriculture, festivals, marriage, civil law, temple rituals, purity. Preserved multiple opinions, showing the richness of rabbinic debate. Served as the foundation of later commentary and study. By writing down the oral law, Judah ensured the continuity of Jewish life in a world without the temple. 4. Diaspora Judaism expands. While Judea remained important, much of Jewish life shifted to the diaspora. Babylon, under the Parthian and later Sasanian empires, became a great center of Jewish learning. Alexandria in Egypt continued as a hub of Hellenistic Jewish culture. Communities in Asia Minor, Rome, and beyond flourished. These communities developed in dialogue with surrounding cultures but maintained a strong sense of identity through Torah and rabbinic leadership. 5. The Talmud, building a civilization of study. Between the 3rd and 6th centuries, rabbinic discussions about the Mishnah were compiled into the Talmud. There were two versions. The Jerusalem Talmud, Talmud Yerushalmi, compiled in Galilee around the 4th century. The Babylonian Talmud, Talmud Bavli, compiled in Babylonia around the 6th century, which became the more authoritative. The Talmud is not just a law code but a vast universe of debate, stories, ethics, theology, and practical wisdom. Studying it became the defining practice of Jewish intellectual life. 6. Shaping Jewish identity. Rabbinic Judaism reshaped Jewish life in several ways. Prayer replaced sacrifice. Daily prayers took on the role of temple rituals. Law as lifestyle. Jewish law, halakha, guided not just worship but every aspect of life, family, business, ethics, and community. Education became central. Every Jewish boy, and in some communities, girls too, was taught Torah. Study became a religious act. Hope for restoration. Even as Jews adapted, they never abandoned the dream of rebuilding the temple. Prayers still yearned for Zion and Jerusalem. 7. Rabbinic authority versus apocalyptic movements. Not all Jews accepted rabbinic authority. Some sects, like the Essenes, had their own traditions. Others pursued messianic or apocalyptic hopes, especially during the later Bar Kokhba revolt, 132 to 135 CE. But over time, Rabbinic Judaism emerged as the dominant path, precisely because it offered a way to live fully Jewish lives even in exile, without depending on national sovereignty or a temple. 8. Jewish resilience in exile. The transformation into Rabbinic Judaism made the Jewish people remarkably resilient. They could maintain identity in far-flung lands. They could adapt to new cultures while keeping core traditions. Their faith was rooted in study and practice, not fragile institutions. This resilience would carry them through centuries of diaspora, persecution, and adaptation. 9. Legacy of the Rabbinic Revolution. The shift after 70 CE ensured Jewish survival. While other ancient religions tied to temples and sacrifices disappeared, Judaism endured because it reinvented itself. From this period onward, Judaism was defined by Torah study, synagogue worship, halakhic practice, rabbinic leadership. These elements became the bedrock of Jewish life for nearly 2,000 years. 10. Looking ahead. The Rabbinic Revolution set the stage for Jewish life under Roman and later Christian rule. The next great test would come with the Bar Kokhba revolt, 132 to 135 CE, another bold but disastrous attempt to restore Jewish independence. Part 10. The Bar Kokhba Revolt and the Final Roman Confrontation. The fall of the Second Temple in 70 CE was devastating, but it did not extinguish Jewish hopes of restoring independence. Over the next several decades, a simmering mix of religious yearning, Roman oppression, and national pride fueled the determination to rise again. This determination culminated in the Bar Kokhba Revolt, 132 to 135 CE, a bold yet catastrophic rebellion that reshaped Jewish destiny for centuries. 1. The Roman context. By the early 2nd century, Judea was under the firm control of the Roman Empire. The Emperor Hadrian, 117 to 138 CE, initially promised tolerance, but his policies soon clashed with Jewish identity. Jerusalem rebuilt as Aelia Capitolina. Hadrian planned to turn Jerusalem into a Roman colony dedicated to Jupiter, complete with pagan temples on the Temple Mount. Ban on circumcision, considered by Romans as barbaric mutilation, circumcision was outlawed, striking at the heart of Jewish religious practice. Land confiscations, Roman soldiers took control of fertile areas, displacing Jewish farmers. For Jews still mourning the loss of the temple, these acts were intolerable. 2. The rise of Bar Kokhba. Into this climate of oppression emerged a charismatic leader, Simon bar Kokhba, later remembered as Bar Kokhba, son of the star. Many rabbis, including the great sage Rabbi Akiva, believed he was the Messiah who would deliver Israel from Rome. His name evoked a messianic prophecy from the Book of Numbers, "A star shall come out of Jacob." Bar Kokhba was both a military strategist and a symbol of national revival. Under his leadership, Jews organized a powerful resistance. 3. The outbreak of revolt, 132 CE. The rebellion began in 132 CE and spread quickly. Jewish forces used guerrilla tactics, striking Roman outposts and retreating to fortified caves. Entire villages supported the fighters, providing food and supplies. Bar Kokhba's army minted coins stamped with Year 1 of the Redemption of Israel, signaling the vision of restored sovereignty. For nearly 3 years, the rebels controlled much of Judea. 4. Jewish life under Bar Kokhba. During the brief period of independence, Bar Kokhba acted as both political and military leader. Religious life was revived with renewed sacrifices and festivals. Many Jews believed they were witnessing the dawn of messianic redemption. Rabbi Akiva publicly declared Bar Kokhba the Messiah, though some sages remained skeptical. 5. Rome strikes back. The Roman Empire, humiliated by the Jewish uprising, sent massive reinforcements under the general Julius Severus. The Roman counterattack was brutal. Scorched earth tactics. Romans destroyed villages, cut off supplies, and starved rebels out of caves and fortresses. Siege of Betar. Bar Kokhba made his last stand at Betar, a stronghold southwest of Jerusalem. In 135 CE, after a long siege, the Romans captured the fortress and slaughtered its defenders. Bar Kokhba was killed, and the dream of messianic deliverance collapsed. 6. Catastrophic losses. The revolt was one of the bloodiest conflicts in Jewish history. Ancient sources claim hundreds of thousands of Jews were killed. Judea was depopulated, survivors were enslaved or exiled. The Romans banned Jews from entering Jerusalem, except on the day of Tisha B'Av to mourn the temple's destruction. Hadrian renamed Judea Syria Palestina, erasing Jewish ties from the land's name and reinforcing exile. 7. Religious aftermath. The failure of the revolt forced another transformation of Jewish life. Rabbi Akiva, along with many rabbis, was executed. The hope of a militant messianic deliverance dimmed. Rabbis emphasized patience, prayer, and study instead. Jerusalem was lost, but Torah became the homeland of the Jews. This reinforced the rabbinic model established after 70 CE, where Jewish identity rested not on sovereignty but on law, tradition, and community. 8. The exile deepens. After Bar Kokhba, Jewish life in Judea declined sharply. Large communities shifted to Galilee, which became the new center of Jewish life in the land of Israel. Babylon, where great academies in Sura and Pumbedita preserved Jewish learning. The wider diaspora, from North Africa to Asia Minor to Rome. From this point on, Jewish history became a story of life in exile, punctuated by hopes for return. 9. Theological reorientation. The rabbis drew critical lessons from the revolt. Messianism was reinterpreted, no longer a political warrior, but a figure who would arrive in God's time. Patience replaced zealotry. Jews were encouraged to wait for divine redemption rather than force it. Study and prayer became the path to holiness. This orientation preserved Judaism through centuries of exile and persecution. 10. Legacy of the Bar Kokhba revolt. Though tragic, the revolt profoundly shaped Jewish destiny. It ended large-scale Jewish resistance to Rome. It cemented rabbinic Judaism as the defining form of Jewish life. It deepened the Jewish diaspora, spreading communities across the Mediterranean and beyond. It left a permanent mark on Jewish memory. Bar Kokhba, once hailed as Messiah, became a symbol of both courage and failed hope. 11. Looking ahead. In the centuries following the revolt, Jewish life adjusted to permanent exile. Centers of learning in Galilee and Babylon would ensure the survival of tradition. The next stage of history would see Jews navigating life under Roman and then Christian rule, shaping their identity in a world where Christianity was rising as a dominant faith. Part 11. Judaism under Roman and early Christian rule. The crushing defeat of the Bar Kokhba revolt in 135 CE marked a turning point in Jewish history. With Jerusalem destroyed and Jews largely banned from the city, the center of Jewish life shifted to new regions, and Judaism entered an era of survival, reinvention, and adaptation. At the same time, Christianity, once a small Jewish sect, began to rise as a distinct religion, gradually becoming the favored faith of the Roman Empire. This period defined Jewish existence for centuries, shaping both religious life and relations with surrounding societies. 1. The aftermath of Bar Kokhba. Following the revolt, Judea depopulated, many Jews were killed, enslaved, or exiled. Those who remained clustered in Galilee. Jerusalem transformed, rebuilt as Aelia Capitolina, with a Roman garrison and pagan temples. Jews were forbidden entry except on Tisha B'Av. Renaming of the land, Hadrian renamed Judea as Syria Palestina, deliberately erasing its Jewish identity. The loss of sovereignty and access to Jerusalem forced Judaism to adapt spiritually and culturally. 2. The rise of Galilee as a center. With Jerusalem closed to Jews, the Galilee became the new heart of Jewish life in the land of Israel. Cities like Sepphoris and Tiberias emerged as centers of scholarship and religious authority. Synagogues flourished, decorated with intricate mosaics that blended Jewish symbolism with local artistic styles. Rabbinic leadership reorganized, ensuring continuity of Jewish law and traditions. The Galilee's rabbinic academies would produce some of the most important Jewish texts. 3. Rabbinic Judaism consolidates. In the absence of the temple, Rabbinic Judaism, focused on Torah, law, and daily practice, solidified. The Mishnah, around 200 CE, Rabbi Judah Hanasi compiled the Mishnah, the first written codification of oral law, ensuring preservation across the diaspora. Oral Torah as central. Study, prayer, and communal life replaced temple rituals as the core of Jewish identity. Synagogue as anchor, the synagogue became the focal point of Jewish worship, community governance, and education. This transformation ensured Judaism's survival even in exile. 4. The Jewish diaspora expands. Beyond the land of Israel, Jewish communities thrived across the Roman Empire. Babylon, under Persian rule, Babylonian Jewry flourished, later producing the Babylonian Talmud. Alexandria, despite earlier turmoil, Alexandria remained a hub of Jewish life and Greek-Jewish culture. Rome and the West, Jewish communities grew in Italy, North Africa, and Gaul. Diaspora Jews balanced loyalty to Rome with fidelity to Torah, often facing suspicion or discrimination. 5. Early relations with Christianity. During this period, Christianity diverged sharply from Judaism. Originally a Jewish sect, Christianity spread among Gentiles, adopting Greco-Roman cultural traits. As Christians sought legitimacy, they distanced themselves from Jews, portraying them as blind to the truth of Jesus. The destruction of the temple was interpreted by some Christians as divine punishment of Jews. This theological separation laid the groundwork for future tensions. 6. Roman policies toward Jews. Under Roman rule, Jewish communities experienced both tolerance and persecution. Jews were recognized as an ancient people with distinct laws and often exempted from emperor worship. However, they paid the fiscus judaicus, a special tax imposed after 70 CE. Periodic outbreaks of violence occurred, often fueled by local rivalries or anti-Jewish sentiment. Still, Jewish communities managed to preserve cohesion and resilience. 7. Constantine and the Christian Empire. A major shift came with Emperor Constantine, r. 306 to 337 CE. He converted to Christianity and legalized the religion in 313 CE. By the end of the century, Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire. Jews lost their privileged status as a recognized people, now living under an empire that officially favored their theological rival. This was a seismic change in Jewish history. 8. Christian laws and restrictions. As the Roman Empire Christianized. Legal restrictions: Jews were barred from certain offices, intermarriage with Christians was prohibited, and missionary activity was suppressed. Protection and prejudice: while emperors often prohibited violence against Jews, the rhetoric of church fathers painted Jews as stubborn rejectors of truth. Jerusalem Christianized. Aelia Capitolina became a Christian holy city, with churches built where the temple once stood. The status of Jews shifted from tolerated minority to marginalized outsiders. 9. Jewish adaptation and resilience. Despite challenges, Jewish communities adapted. Rabbinic study intensified, ensuring Jewish continuity. Communal structures strengthened, with local leaders, patriarchs, exilarchs, guiding Jewish life. Jewish thought grappled with exile, interpreting it as temporary punishment and a call for spiritual renewal. The concept of galut, exile, became central. Jews saw themselves as wanderers awaiting redemption. 10. Legacy of the Roman and early Christian era. By the 4th century, Judaism had transitioned fully into a religion of law, community, and learning, rather than temple-centered sacrifice. The Jewish people were dispersed widely but held together by shared texts and traditions. Christianity had risen to dominance, reshaping Jewish status in the empire and setting the stage for medieval relations. This era defined the framework in which Jews would live for the next millennium, a minority faith under Christian rule, often tolerated but never equal. 11. Looking ahead. The next chapter in Jewish history would unfold in the Byzantine Empire and beyond, as Jews navigated life under Christian emperors while Babylonian Jewry laid the foundations for one of Judaism's greatest works, the Talmud. Part 12. The Byzantine Era and the Babylonian Talmud. The centuries between the 4th and 7th centuries were among the most formative in Jewish history. On one hand, Jews living under the Byzantine Empire experienced increasingly harsh restrictions, violence, and marginalization. On the other hand, in Babylonia, Mesopotamia under Persian rule, Jewish life thrived, and rabbinic scholarship reached new heights with the development of the Babylonian Talmud, one of Judaism's greatest intellectual and religious achievements. 1. Jews under Byzantine rule. Christianization of the empire. After Constantine's conversion and the Council of Nicaea, 325 CE, the Roman Empire steadily Christianized. The Byzantine rulers, based in Constantinople, sought to make Christianity not only dominant but universal. Jews, once tolerated as an ancient people, now became religious outsiders, often portrayed as stubborn witnesses to Christian truth. Legal and social restrictions. Byzantine legislation increasingly limited Jewish freedoms. Jews were prohibited from building new synagogues. They could not hold certain government offices. Conversions to Judaism were forbidden and punishable. The Codex Theodosianus, 438 CE, formalized many anti-Jewish laws, embedding discrimination into imperial policy. Violence and forced conversions. Pogroms and mob violence erupted, often encouraged by local bishops. Jewish communities in places like Alexandria, Antioch, and Cyprus suffered massacres. Periods of forced baptism occurred, though imperial policy often vacillated between harsh persecution and pragmatic tolerance. Despite these challenges, Jewish life persisted in the Byzantine Empire, particularly in Galilee and along the Mediterranean coast. 2. Jewish centers in the land of Israel. Though Jerusalem was off-limits, Jews in the Byzantine Empire continued to live in towns across Galilee and the coastal plain. Archaeological remains of Byzantine-era synagogues, such as those at Beit Alpha and Hamat Tiberias, reveal rich mosaics with Jewish and zodiac imagery. Rabbinic courts in Tiberias remained active. The Jerusalem Talmud, Talmud Yerushalmi, was completed around the 5th century, though less comprehensive than its Babylonian counterpart. Yet, due to Byzantine oppression, Jewish scholarship in the land of Israel declined compared to Babylonia. 3. The flourishing of Babylonian Jewry. While Jews suffered under Byzantine rule, Jewish life in Babylonia, Mesopotamia, prospered under the relatively tolerant Sasanian Persian Empire. Babylonia had long been home to a large Jewish population, dating back to the Babylonian exile in the 6th century BCE. By late antiquity, Babylonian Jews formed a vibrant, self-governing community, with institutions of learning, courts, and leadership. The community was led by exilarchs, Resh Galuta, dynastic leaders claiming descent from King David, recognized by Persian rulers as the secular heads of the Jews. Geonim and rabbis, heads of the academies who exercised spiritual and intellectual authority. 4. The rabbinic academies. Two great academies of learning dominated Babylonian Jewry. Sura, founded by Rav Abba Arika, 175 to 247 CE. Pumbedita, renowned for its rigorous analytical methods. These academies debated, studied, and interpreted Jewish law. Their scholars, Amoraim, built upon the Mishnah, producing discussions that became the Gemara, the commentary and expansion on the Mishnah. Together, Mishnah and Gemara formed the Talmud. 5. The Babylonian Talmud. The Babylonian Talmud, Talmud Bavli, was completed between the 5th and 6th centuries CE. Far longer and more comprehensive than the Jerusalem Talmud, it became the definitive text of Rabbinic Judaism. It contained halakha, legal rulings, laws governing religious and civil life; agada, narratives, folklore, ethics; stories, legends, and theological reflections; dialectical debates, layered discussions showing multiple viewpoints, embodying Judaism's embrace of dialogue and dissent. Unlike a legal code, the Talmud is a vast, complex conversation spanning centuries and regions. 6. The Talmud as Jewish constitution. The Babylonian Talmud provided a portable homeland. In exile, Jews carried the Talmud as their source of law and identity. A binding unity, dispersed Jews across the world shared the same text, creating cohesion despite geography. A spiritual resistance, while Jews lacked political power, Talmudic learning empowered them with intellectual sovereignty. Its impact cannot be overstated. The Talmud became the heart of Jewish life for the next 1,500 years. 7. Judaism's relationship with Persia. Relations between Jews and the Sasanian Empire were generally stable. Jews were allowed to govern themselves internally. They played roles in commerce and agriculture. However, during wars between Byzantium and Persia, Jews sometimes suffered persecution due to suspicions of disloyalty. Still, compared to Byzantine lands, Babylonia was a haven for Jewish cultural flourishing. 8. Christianity, Judaism, and emerging Islam. By the 6th and 7th centuries, Byzantine hostility continued, while Babylonia remained Jewishly vibrant. Yet a new force was emerging. In the Arabian Peninsula, pre-Islamic Jewish communities existed in Yemen, Yathrib, Medina, and elsewhere. These communities would play a role in the formative years of Islam in the 7th century. Judaism was thus positioned at the crossroads of three great civilizations: Christian, Persian, and soon, Islamic. 9. Key legacies of this period. The Babylonian Talmud became the cornerstone of Jewish law, thought, and identity. The shift of Jewish power eastward, from the land of Israel to Babylonia, shaped Jewish life until the Middle Ages. Byzantine oppression cemented the Jewish identity of living as a minority under often hostile Christian regimes. The rabbinic framework of synagogue, study, and community ensured Jewish survival without sovereignty. 10. Looking ahead. The next era would bring dramatic change: the rise of Islam in the 7th century. Jewish communities, long split between oppressive Byzantine rule and tolerant Persia, would now encounter a new empire that would dramatically alter the course of Jewish history. Part 13. The Rise of Islam and the Golden Age of Jewish Culture. 1. The birth of Islam and Jewish communities in Arabia. Pre-Islamic Jewish Arabia. Before Islam, Jewish tribes lived in Arabia, particularly in Yathrib, later Medina, Khaybar, and Yemen. They were engaged in agriculture, crafts, and trade, and often intermingled with Arab tribes. Jewish tribes in Medina played significant roles in the city's politics. Muhammad and the Jews. When Islam arose in the 7th century, Jewish communities initially interacted with Muhammad. Early on, Muhammad looked to Jews as fellow monotheists, adopting practices like fasting and prayer facing Jerusalem. However, political conflicts in Medina led to clashes with Jewish tribes. Some were expelled, others subdued, and in Khaybar, Jews lived under Muslim rule with heavy taxation. These events shaped Islamic attitudes toward Jews. As people of the book, Jews were to be tolerated but subordinate. 2. The dhimmi system. Under Islamic rule, Jews, along with Christians and later Zoroastrians, were given dhimmi, protected people, status. They were allowed to practice their religion, maintain synagogues, and govern their communities. In return, they had to pay the jizya tax and accept social restrictions, such as distinctive dress in some regions. This arrangement was both limiting and protective. It enshrined inequality, but also provided a framework for Jewish survival in Muslim lands. 3. The Jewish world splits. By the 8th century, Jews lived under two dominant civilizations. Christian Europe, Byzantine and later Latin Christendom, often hostile and repressive. The Islamic caliphates, Umayyad, Abbasid, and successors, where Jews enjoyed greater tolerance, mobility, and cultural engagement. This divergence meant that the center of Jewish life shifted decisively to the Islamic world during the Middle Ages. 4. The Abbasid Caliphate and Jewish flourishing. Baghdad as a new center. When the Abbasids founded Baghdad, 762 CE, it became the capital of the Islamic world and a hub of scholarship. Jewish life thrived. The exilarch, Resh Galuta, claiming descent from King David, was recognized as leader of the Jews. Great academies in Sura and Pumbedita, continuing from the Talmudic period, produced scholarship, legal rulings, and responsa that reached Jews across the diaspora. The Geonic period. The heads of the academies, known as Geonim, became the supreme authorities of Jewish law, 650 to 1050 CE. They issued responsa, teshavot, to Jewish communities as far as Spain and North Africa. They interpreted and applied the Babylonian Talmud, cementing its status as the foundation of Jewish law. Figures like Saadia Jayan, 882 to 942 CE, defended rabbinic tradition against rivals, such as the Karaites, and pioneered Jewish philosophy in dialogue with Islamic thought. 5. The Karaites and alternative Jewish movements. Karaite challenge. The Karaite movement, originating in the 8th to 9th centuries, rejected the oral Torah, Talmud, and relied solely on the Hebrew Bible. Karaites spread across the Middle East, challenging rabbinic Judaism's dominance. They emphasized scripture, calendrical precision, and literal interpretation. Rabbinic response. Leaders like Saadia Jayan wrote extensively against Karaites, arguing for the necessity of rabbinic interpretation. While rabbinic Judaism ultimately prevailed, the Karaites remained an influential minority for centuries. 6. Jews in Al-Andalus, Muslim Spain. Perhaps the most celebrated Jewish flourishing in the Islamic world occurred in Muslim Spain, Al-Andalus, 8th to 12th centuries. Tolerance and opportunity. Under the Umayyads of Córdoba, Jews enjoyed relative freedom. They rose to positions of influence as physicians, diplomats, financiers, and scholars. Arabic became the language of Jewish philosophy, poetry, and science. The Golden Age of Jewish Poetry and Philosophy. Hasdai ibn Shaprat, 915 to 970 CE, court physician and diplomat, secured Jewish rights and promoted culture. Solomon ibn Gabirol, 1021 to 1058 CE, philosopher and poet, produced works blending Judaism and Neoplatonism. Judah Halevi, 1075 to 1141 CE, poet and thinker, celebrated the land of Israel in his verses and critiqued philosophy in his work Kuzari. Moses Maimonides, 1138 to 1204 CE. Perhaps the greatest medieval Jewish thinker, synthesized Aristotelian philosophy with Judaism in the Guide for the Perplexed and codified Jewish law in Mishnah Torah. 7. Jewish life under Islamic dynasties. Across the Islamic world, Jews often thrived. In North Africa, Fez, Cairo, Tunis, vibrant Jewish communities emerged. In Persia, Jews continued their scholarly traditions. The Cairo Geniza, a vast collection of discarded Jewish writings preserved in Egypt, reveals the richness of Jewish life under Islam: business contracts, letters, religious works, and everyday documents. Yet Jewish fortunes varied. Periods of tolerance were punctuated by persecution, especially under more rigid dynasties like the Almohads in the 12th century. 8. Intellectual crossroads. Islamic civilization fostered an environment of learning in which Jews participated fully. Jewish thinkers engaged with Islamic philosophy, medicine, astronomy, and mathematics. Works were written in Judeo-Arabic, Arabic and Hebrew script. Jewish doctors, such as Maimonides, served Muslim rulers. This intercultural exchange shaped not only Judaism but also broader intellectual history. 9. Limits of tolerance. The dhimmi system, though protective, reminded Jews of their subordinate place. Occasional riots, forced conversions, and humiliating dress codes occurred. Under the Almohads, 12th century, Jews faced expulsion and persecution, forcing many, including Maimonides, to flee Spain. Thus, the Jewish experience in the Muslim world oscillated between golden flourishing and vulnerability. 10. Legacy of the Islamic Golden Age. The rise of Islam and the Jewish Golden Age left a lasting impact. The Geonic tradition made the Talmud the central pillar of Judaism. Jewish philosophy, science, and poetry reached new heights. The model of diaspora adaptability, thriving under foreign rule, contributing to host cultures, while maintaining identity, was firmly established. Arabic became as important as Hebrew for Jewish expression during this era. 11. Looking ahead. By the 12th century, Jewish life under Islam had reached great heights but also new dangers. With the Crusades raging in Christian Europe and the rise of new Islamic dynasties, Jewish communities would soon face upheavals that reshaped their destiny once again. Part 14. The Crusades and Jewish Suffering in Christian Europe. 1. The setting: medieval Christendom. By the late 11th century, Europe was deeply Christianized under the influence of the Catholic Church. The Church sought to consolidate spiritual and temporal power, leading to growing intolerance of religious minorities. Jews in Christian Europe lived in fragile conditions, tolerated as witnesses to Christian truth but confined to roles as moneylenders, merchants, or small tradesmen. While Jewish communities existed across France, Germany, England, and Italy, their legal status was precarious, dependent on rulers' whims and papal decrees. Into this context erupted the Crusades, wars launched in the name of Christendom that would have catastrophic consequences for the Jews. 2. The First Crusade, 1096, and the Rhineland massacres. Call for crusade. In 1095, Pope Urban II called for a holy war to reclaim Jerusalem from Muslim control. Thousands of knights, peasants, and adventurers joined the cause, believing they were fighting for God and their salvation. Turning against the Jews. On their way east, crusading mobs unleashed violence on Jewish communities in the Rhineland, Germany. In Worms, Speyer, and Mainz, entire communities were massacred. Some Jews were forced to convert, others chose martyrdom, Kiddush Hashem, sanctification of God's name, rather than abandon their faith. Testimonies and Lamentations. Jewish chroniclers like Solomon Bar Simpson recorded the horrors in harrowing detail. This was one of the first instances of large-scale, organized anti-Semitic violence in Europe. 3. Later Crusades and Jewish vulnerability. Second and Third Crusades. The Second Crusade, 1147, brought new attacks on Jews in France and Germany, again justified by crusaders as cleansing Christendom before liberating the Holy Land. The Third Crusade, 1189 to 1192, saw Jewish communities in England attacked, notably during the coronation of Richard the Lionheart. Riots and expulsions. Riots in London and York, 1190, culminated in the mass suicide of Jews in Clifford's Tower to avoid forced baptism. Similar violence spread across England, foreshadowing the eventual expulsion of Jews from the kingdom in 1290. 4. The Church and the Jews. The Catholic Church played a double-edged role. On one hand, popes occasionally issued decrees forbidding the killing of Jews. On the other hand, church teaching portrayed Jews as Christ killers, fueling deep-rooted hatred. The Fourth Lateran Council, 1215, reinforced Jewish subjugation, requiring Jews to wear distinguishing badges and restricting public roles. 5. Blood libels and host desecration accusations. From the 12th century onward, new myths emerged that intensified Jewish persecution. Blood libel, accusations that Jews murdered Christian children for ritual purposes, first recorded in Norwich, England, 1144. Host desecration, claims that Jews desecrated the consecrated bread of the Eucharist, attacking the very symbol of Christian faith. Both accusations led to massacres, expulsions, and executions, embedding anti-Semitic tropes that lasted for centuries. 6. Economic roles and resentment. As guilds excluded Jews from most professions, rulers increasingly employed Jews as moneylenders, providing credit in societies where Christian usury laws forbade lending with interest. Tax farmers and financiers, serving rulers who relied on Jewish expertise and networks. This role made Jews both indispensable and resented. When debts mounted, rulers often canceled them by expelling Jews or allowing mobs to attack. 7. Martyrdom and spiritual resilience. The Crusades gave rise to new forms of Jewish spirituality centered on martyrdom, Kiddush Hashem. Communities faced with forced conversion sometimes chose collective suicide. Prayers and liturgical poetry, Payutim, memorialized the martyrs, weaving their sacrifices into Jewish identity. The image of Jews as eternal witnesses of faith, suffering for God's name, became central to medieval Jewish consciousness. 8. Migration and shifts in Jewish life. The violence of the Crusades reshaped Jewish demographics. Many Jews fled Western Europe for Eastern Europe, Poland, Lithuania, where rulers invited them to settle. Jewish communities in Spain, then under both Muslim and Christian control, gained new importance. Italy became a hub of Jewish scholarship, bridging Ashkenazic, German French, and Sephardic, Spanish North African, traditions. This eastward shift laid the foundation for later Ashkenazi Jewry in Poland and Eastern Europe, which would dominate Jewish life for centuries. 9. Intellectual and cultural developments. Despite suffering, Jewish learning flourished. Rashi, 1040 to 1105, of Troyes produced his legendary Bible and Talmud commentaries, accessible and enduring. The Tosafists, Rashi's intellectual heirs, continued Talmudic commentary in France and Germany. These works anchored Ashkenazi Judaism, balancing study, law, and spiritual endurance. 10. Legacy of the Crusades for Jewish history. The Crusades left deep scars. They normalized anti-Semitic violence in Christian Europe. They cemented stereotypes of Jews as outsiders, moneylenders, and Christ rejectors. They forged a new Jewish identity of resilience, martyrdom, and communal solidarity. The Jewish experience in Christian Europe would remain precarious, alternating between brief tolerance and devastating persecution. 11. Looking ahead. In the 13th to 15th centuries, Jewish life would continue to face immense upheaval. Expulsions from England, France, and later Spain. The growing influence of the Inquisition. But also, in parallel, a flowering of Jewish mysticism in the form of Kabbalah. The next chapter will explore how expulsions and migrations reshaped the Jewish diaspora once again. Part 15, Expulsions, Migrations, and the rise of Kabbalah, 13th to 15th century CE. 1. The European backdrop. The 13th to 15th centuries were turbulent for Europe as a whole. The Catholic Church asserted dominance over kings and daily life. Emerging monarchies consolidated power, seeking national unity often at the expense of religious minorities. Jews, already restricted by church councils, faced growing hostility rooted in theology, economics, and social resentment. This era saw some of the most consequential expulsions in Jewish history, alongside the flowering of Jewish mysticism, known as Kabbalah. 2. The expulsion from England, 1290. Under King Edward I, all Jews were expelled from England in 1290. The monarchy had heavily taxed Jewish communities, treating them as royal property. Once their financial usefulness was deemed exhausted, expulsion served both political and economic purposes. This was the first official expulsion of Jews from a European kingdom, setting a precedent that others would follow. 3. France and cycles of expulsion. France expelled Jews multiple times throughout the 13th and 14th centuries, only to recall them when kings needed their financial services. King Philip IV expelled Jews in 1306, seizing their property. Later monarchs repeated the pattern. By 1394, Jews were permanently expelled from France, leaving behind centuries of rich cultural life. 4. The Black Death and Persecutions, 1348 to 1351. The Black Death, which killed a third of Europe's population, triggered devastating violence against Jews. Jews were scapegoated, accused of poisoning wells and spreading the plague. Pogroms swept across the continent, with massacres in Strasbourg, Mainz, and elsewhere. Some rulers, like the Pope, attempted to protect Jews, but mobs often ignored such decrees. These events devastated Jewish communities and accelerated their migration eastward. 5. The rise of Jewish life in Spain. While Western Europe expelled its Jews, Spain, Sepharad, became the new center of Jewish life. Under both Muslim and Christian rule, Jews had played vital roles as scholars, physicians, translators, and financiers. By the 13th and 14th centuries, Spanish Jewry reached a golden age of philosophy, poetry, and religious thought. Figures like Moses Maimonides, 1138 to 1204, though living in earlier generations, set the intellectual tone. Jews in Christian Spain contributed to science, medicine, and the translation of Arabic works into Latin, enriching European knowledge. 6. Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism emerges. Amid persecution and displacement, a new spiritual current took shape, Kabbalah. Origins. Rooted in earlier mystical traditions such as the Sefer Yetzirah and Haikalat literature. Flourished in Provence, France, and later in Spain. The Zohar. The central text of Kabbalah, attributed to Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, 2nd century. But compiled in 13th century Spain by Moses de Leon. The Zohar presented a mystical interpretation of the Torah, portraying the universe as a series of emanations, sphirot, from the divine. It emphasized cosmic harmony, spiritual struggle, and the mystical significance of human actions. Impact. Kabbalah provided a framework of hope and meaning amid suffering. It offered Jews a sense of cosmic purpose. Their prayers, deeds, and endurance affected not only their survival but the balance of the divine cosmos. 7. The Disputation of Barcelona, 1263, and forced conversions. The 13th century also saw public debates between Jewish and Christian scholars, often staged to pressure Jews into conversion. The Disputation of Barcelona, 1263, between Rabbi Nachmanides, Ramban, and the converted Jew Pablo Cristiani became a defining event. Though Nachmanides defended Judaism brilliantly, the Church declared victory. Such disputations, followed by forced conversions, weakened Jewish security in Spain and elsewhere. 8. The Pogroms of 1391. One of the darkest episodes of medieval Spanish Jewry. Widespread anti-Jewish riots swept through Seville, Toledo, and other cities. Thousands of Jews were killed, many more were forcibly baptized. A new population of conversos, new Christians, emerged, Jews who converted to Christianity but often secretly maintained Jewish practices. This dual identity would haunt Spanish Jewry and set the stage for the Inquisition. 9. Shifting demographics, eastward migration. By the late 14th century, Jews increasingly migrated to Poland, Lithuania, and Eastern Europe, where rulers welcomed them for their economic contributions. The Statute of Kalisz, 1264, granted Jews protections and privileges in Poland, fostering one of the largest Jewish communities in the world by the early modern era. This migration laid the foundation for centuries of Jewish life in Eastern Europe. 10. The road to 1492. By the 15th century, Spain remained the largest and most vibrant Jewish center, but tension mounted. Conversos were accused of secretly practicing Judaism. The Spanish Inquisition, established in 1478, targeted conversos suspected of Judaizing. This would culminate in the Edict of Expulsion, 1492, forcing all Jews to leave Spain, a watershed moment that redefined the Jewish diaspora. 11. Legacy of the period. The expulsions and persecutions of the 13th to 15th centuries reshaped Judaism. Geographically, Western Europe largely emptied of Jews, Eastern Europe and the Ottoman Empire became new centers. Spiritually, Kabbalah transformed Jewish theology, emphasizing mystical engagement with God. Socially, the converso phenomenon created a complex identity crisis that blurred religious boundaries. Judaism endured by adapting, through migration, new forms of learning, and deepening spiritual traditions. 12. Looking ahead. The next chapter will explore the Spanish expulsion of 1492 and its aftermath, including the rise of Sephardic Jewry across the Ottoman Empire, North Africa, and beyond, and how this shaped the global Jewish experience. Part 16, The Spanish Expulsion, the Inquisition, and the Sephardic Diaspora, 15th to 16th century CE. 1. Spain in the 15th century, a shifting landscape. By the 1400s, Spain had become the epicenter of Jewish life. Jewish communities thrived in Castile, Aragon, and other regions, producing scholars, poets, physicians, and financiers. However, the success of Jews also provoked resentment among Christians. Key background factors. The Reconquista, the centuries-long campaign by Christian kingdoms to reclaim Iberia from Muslim rule, culminated in 1492 with the fall of Granada. The marriage of Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabella of Castile unified Spain under a strongly Catholic monarchy. The rise of religious nationalism demanded uniformity of faith. Jews, along with Muslims, became targets in the new Spain that equated national unity with Christian purity. 2. Conversos and the Inquisition. After the pogroms of 1391, thousands of Jews converted to Christianity under duress. These converts, known as conversos or new Christians, entered Spanish society but often remained suspected of secretly practicing Judaism, crypto-Judaism. The monarchy feared conversos diluted the purity of Christian faith. In 1478, the Spanish Inquisition was established, authorized by Pope Sixtus IV, but controlled by the crown. Unlike earlier Inquisitions, which targeted heresy in general, the Spanish Inquisition fixated on conversos accused of Judaizing. Torture, public trials, autos de fe, and executions instilled terror. The Inquisition blurred lines between religion and ethnicity. Even if Jews converted, they were marked as suspect due to their ancestry. This foreshadowed modern notions of racialized identity. 3. The Edict of Expulsion, 1492. On March 31, 1492, shortly after conquering Granada, Ferdinand and Isabella issued the Alhambra Decree. All Jews who refused baptism were ordered to leave Spain within 4 months. Jews were prohibited from taking gold, silver, or valuables. They could carry only what they sold or converted into portable goods. Estimates suggest between 40,000 and 100,000 Jews left Spain, though some historians argue the numbers were higher. This was one of the most traumatic events in Jewish history. Families were uprooted, communities destroyed, and centuries of cultural flourishing abruptly ended. 4. Immediate consequences of the expulsion. Conversion. Many Jews converted to Christianity to remain in Spain, swelling the converso population. Exile. Jews fled in multiple directions: Portugal, North Africa, the Ottoman Empire, and Italy. Tragedy. Expelled Jews faced robbery, shipwrecks, and betrayal by unscrupulous traders. Some who fled to Portugal were soon expelled again in 1497 when Portugal followed Spain's example. 5. The Sephardic diaspora. The expelled Jews of Spain, known as Sephardim, from Sepharad, the Hebrew word for Spain, reshaped Jewish history. Ottoman Empire. Sultan Bayezid II welcomed Jews, remarking that Ferdinand had impoverished his own kingdom while enriching the Ottomans. Cities like Salonika, Istanbul, and Saif became thriving Sephardic centers. Jews brought skills in trade, finance, medicine, and printing, contributing to Ottoman prosperity. North Africa. Jews settled in Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia, where communities blended with older Jewish populations. Italy. Sephardic refugees established vibrant communities in Venice, Livorno, and other ports, influencing Italian commerce and scholarship. The Netherlands and Western Europe. Later generations of Sephardim migrated to Amsterdam, London, and Hamburg, where they became prominent in finance and trade. Sephardic traditions, language, Ladino, a Judeo-Spanish dialect, and liturgy spread widely, leaving a lasting imprint on global Judaism. 6. Kabbalah in Safed. One of the most remarkable spiritual outcomes of the Sephardic diaspora was the flowering of Kabbalah in Safed, Galilee, 16th century. Key figures. Rabbi Isaac Luria, the Ari, 1534–1572 revolutionized Kabbalah with doctrines of Tzimtzum, divine contraction, Shevarat HaKalim, shattering of the vessels, and Tikkun Olam, repair of the world. Rabbi Joseph Caro, 1488–1575 author of the Shulchan Aruch, the definitive code of Jewish law. Rabbi Shlomo Alkabetz, composer of the Sabbath hymn Lechad Dodi. Safed became the spiritual capital of world Jewry, offering mystical hope and legal guidance during a time of displacement. 7. Ashkenazi Jews in contrast. While Sephardim dispersed around the Mediterranean, Ashkenazi Jews, of Central and Eastern Europe, faced their own struggles. Persecutions continued in German lands. In Poland-Lithuania, Jews found relative tolerance and autonomy under royal charters. By the 16th century, Eastern Europe became the demographic center of Ashkenazi Jewry, paralleling Sephardic growth in the Mediterranean. 8. The legacy of the expulsion. The expulsion of 1492 fundamentally transformed Judaism. It created a global diaspora, dispersing Jews across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. Sephardic culture became cosmopolitan, rooted in resilience and adaptability. The Inquisition ensured that Spain itself was largely devoid of open Jewish life for centuries, though conversos remained a hidden presence. Mysticism and law intertwined in new ways, particularly in Safed, influencing Jewish thought for generations. 9. Looking ahead. The next chapter will explore the 16th to 17th centuries, focusing on the challenges and opportunities Jews faced in the Ottoman Empire, Poland-Lithuania, and Western Europe. We will see how Jews contributed to commerce, endured restrictions, and prepared for the upheavals of the modern era. Part 17, Jewish Life in the Ottoman Empire, Poland-Lithuania, and Early Modern Europe, 16th to 17th century CE. 1. The New Jewish Geography of the Early Modern Era. By the 16th century, the Jewish world had dramatically shifted. With Spain and Portugal closed to Jews, two new centers emerged. The Ottoman Empire, where Sephardic Jews rebuilt their lives. Poland-Lithuania, where Ashkenazi Jews grew in number and influence. Meanwhile, Jewish life in Western Europe, Italy, France, and the Netherlands, was marked by restriction in some places and opportunity in others. This was an age of both stability and crisis, laying the foundations for modern Jewish identity. 2. Jews in the Ottoman Empire. Arrival and settlement. Following the expulsion of 1492, the Ottoman Empire became the chief refuge for Sephardic Jews. Sultan Bayezid II welcomed them, recognizing their value as merchants, artisans, doctors, and financiers. Salonika, Thessaloniki, became a predominantly Jewish city, with over 50% of the population Jewish by the 16th century. Istanbul and Smyrna, Izmir, also developed large communities. Jews in the empire often spoke Ladino, Judeo-Spanish, which became a cultural and literary language. Autonomy and community life. Ottoman Jews were governed through the millet system, which allowed religious minorities to self-administer under their own leaders. Rabbis and communal councils, kahal, oversaw education, charity, and internal disputes. Jewish courts, batei din, had authority in civil matters. Contributions. Jewish printers spread Hebrew texts throughout the empire, aiding the transmission of scholarship. Physicians like Moses Hammon, personal doctor to Suleiman the Magnificent, held prestigious positions. Trade networks connected Jews of the Ottoman Empire to Italy, North Africa, and the Middle East. The Ottoman period was not free of discrimination, but relative to Christian Europe, Jews experienced greater security and opportunity. 3. The Golden Age of Safed. In Safed, Galilee, Jewish mysticism flourished. The teachings of Rabbi Isaac Luria, the Ari, transformed Kabbalah, emphasizing cosmic repair, Tikkun Olam. Rabbi Joseph Caro's Shulchan Aruch standardized Jewish law, becoming the most authoritative legal text in Judaism. Safed's mystics infused Jewish spirituality with a messianic hope that spread worldwide. This blend of legal codification and mystical vision defined Judaism for centuries to come. 4. The Jews of Poland-Lithuania. While Sephardim thrived in the Mediterranean, Ashkenazi Jews found a new home in Eastern Europe. Charters and protection. Polish kings granted Jews privileges to settle and engage in trade. The Statute of Kalisz, 1264, had already provided protections, but by the 16th century, Poland-Lithuania became the largest Jewish center in the world, with hundreds of thousands of Jews. Autonomy. Jewish communities were organized into kahals, which regulated taxes, education, and religious life. The Council of Four Lands, V'ad Arba Aratzot, founded in the 16th century, was a national Jewish body representing Polish Jewry. This unique institution allowed Jews to negotiate with the crown and maintain internal governance. Culture and scholarship. Yeshivo, rabbinic academies, flourished in Krakow, Lublin, and Vilna. Rabbi Moses Israels, Rema, of Krakow wrote glosses on the Shulchan Aruch, adapting Jewish law for Ashkenazi practice. Jewish printing presses spread Talmudic scholarship across Europe. Poland-Lithuania became the spiritual heart of Ashkenazi Judaism, shaping its traditions, liturgy, and intellectual life. 5. Crisis in Eastern Europe. By the mid-17th century, Jewish life in Poland-Lithuania faced catastrophe. The Khmelnytsky Uprising, 1648–1657, in Ukraine saw Cossacks and peasants revolt against Polish nobility. Jews, associated with landlords as tax collectors and estate managers, became targets. Tens of thousands of Jews were massacred, entire communities were destroyed. The trauma was compared to the destruction of the temple, leaving a deep mark on Jewish memory. This devastation disrupted the relative stability Jews had enjoyed and fueled new messianic hopes. 6. Messianic fervor, Sabbatai Zevi. In the aftermath of tragedy, Jews yearned for redemption. This climate gave rise to Sabbatai Zevi, 1626–1676, a mystic from Smyrna who proclaimed himself the Messiah. His claims spread rapidly through Sephardic and Ashkenazi communities, aided by widespread despair. When Zevi converted to Islam in 1666 under Ottoman pressure, Jews were left shattered and disillusioned. Yet, Sabbatinism continued in underground sects, shaping later movements. This episode illustrated the deep messianic undercurrents of early modern Judaism. 7. Western Europe, Italy, the Netherlands, and beyond. Italy. Jews lived in cities like Venice and Rome but faced restrictions. The first official ghetto was established in Venice in 1516, creating a model for segregated Jewish quarters. The Netherlands. Amsterdam became a haven for Sephardic Jews fleeing Iberia. Here, Jews engaged in commerce, finance, and publishing. Figures like Manasseh ben Israel promoted Jewish-Christian dialogue and influenced England's readmission of Jews in 1656. England and France. Jews had been expelled from England in 1290 but were informally readmitted under Oliver Cromwell in the mid-17th century. France, meanwhile, allowed only limited Jewish settlement in Bordeaux and Avignon. 8. Contrasts in Jewish experience. By the end of the 17th century, Jewish life was divided into Sephardic communities, cosmopolitan, mercantile, often integrated into Ottoman and Western societies. Ashkenazi communities, rooted in Eastern Europe, centered on Torah study, autonomous councils, and local economic roles. Despite different trajectories, Jews everywhere shared vulnerability to violence, expulsion, and the hope for redemption. 9. The early modern foundations. The 16th to 17th centuries laid groundwork for modern Jewish history. The codification of Jewish law unified practice across communities. Mystical and messianic movements reflected deep spiritual resilience. Migration patterns created the global Sephardic-Ashkenazi divide. Economic and cultural contributions tied Jews increasingly to global trade. These centuries were both a golden age of Jewish scholarship and a time of deep crisis, preparing the stage for the Enlightenment, emancipation, and modernity. 10. Looking ahead. The next chapter will cover Part 18, the Enlightenment, Emancipation, and Jewish Modernity, 18th to 19th century CE. When Jewish life confronted modern European ideas, secularization, and the struggles of integration. Part 18, the Enlightenment, Emancipation, and Jewish Modernity, 18th to 19th century CE. 1. Entering the Age of Enlightenment. The 18th century was a turning point for European society. The Enlightenment, with its emphasis on reason, individual rights, and secular learning, challenged traditional authority. For Jews, this intellectual revolution posed new questions. Could Jews fully integrate into European society? Would emancipation follow? And what would become of traditional Jewish life if it did? Jewish communities, long confined to ghettos, restricted by law, and stigmatized, suddenly faced both opportunity and risk in the modern world. 2. The Haskalah, the Jewish Enlightenment. Origins. The Haskalah began in Central and Eastern Europe, inspired by the broader Enlightenment. Its leaders, known as Maskilim, enlightened ones, promoted secular learning alongside traditional studies, integration into wider society, and cultural renewal. Key figures. Moses Mendelssohn, 1729 to 1786. The father of the Haskalah argued that Jews could be both fully Jewish and fully European citizens. His translation of the Bible into German opened Jewish texts to modern readers. Mendelssohn's philosophy encouraged Jews to embrace Enlightenment values while maintaining Judaism as a faith. Goals of the Haskalah. Promotion of secular education in science, philosophy, and languages. Reforms in Jewish education, moving beyond purely Talmudic focus. Encouragement of Jews to dress, speak, and act more like their non-Jewish neighbors to reduce social barriers. 3. Emancipation and citizenship. France, the first breakthrough. The French Revolution, 1789, declared liberty, equality, and fraternity for all. In 1791, France became the first European state to grant Jews full citizenship. This was revolutionary. Jews were no longer only members of religious communities, but full citizens of modern nation-states. Western and Central Europe. Emancipation spread unevenly. Germany saw gradual emancipation during the 19th century, though anti-Jewish laws persisted in many states. Austria-Hungary granted full rights to Jews in 1867. Italy emancipated Jews after unification in 1870. In every case, emancipation came with conditions: assimilation, military service, and loyalty to the state. Eastern Europe. In Poland and Russia, emancipation lagged far behind. Jews were concentrated in the Pale of Settlement, restricted to certain towns and occupations. Here, Jews remained more socially segregated and vulnerable to hostility. 4. Jewish religious reform. The encounter with modernity created new movements within Judaism. Reform Judaism. Originating in Germany in the early 19th century, Reform Judaism sought to adapt Jewish practice to modern life. Innovations included prayers in local languages, reduced emphasis on ritual law, and a focus on ethical teachings. Reform Jews embraced integration into broader society while maintaining Jewish identity. Conservative, positive historical Judaism. Emerging as a middle path, it sought to preserve tradition while allowing for gradual adaptation. Leaders like Zacharias Frankel emphasized historical continuity alongside modern scholarship. Orthodoxy. In response, traditionalist rabbis such as Rabbi Moses Sofer, Chatam Sofer, insisted on strict adherence to halakha, Jewish law. Orthodoxy framed itself as the protector of authentic Judaism against modern compromise. These divisions, Reform, Conservative, and Orthodox, remain central to Jewish denominational life today. 5. Jews and modern society. Cultural and economic roles. In Germany, Austria, and France, Jews became prominent in finance, trade, journalism, and academia. Families like the Rothschilds rose to international prominence in banking. Jewish writers, artists, and scientists contributed to modern European culture. Social tensions. Emancipation did not end anti-Semitism. Instead, it transformed it. Religious anti-Judaism gave way to modern racial anti-Semitism, portraying Jews as an alien, corrupting force. Conspiracy theories about Jewish financial power and dual loyalty spread widely. Russia and Eastern Europe. Russian Jews faced harsh restrictions, forced conscription, and pogroms, organized massacres. The pogroms of 1881 to 1882, following the assassination of Tsar Alexander II, sparked mass migration to America and Western Europe. 6. Migration and the birth of modern Jewish communities abroad. America. Between 1880 and 1924, over 2 million Jews emigrated from Eastern Europe to the United States. In cities like New York, Jewish neighborhoods flourished, with Yiddish theaters, newspapers, and labor movements. American Jewry would become one of the largest and most influential Jewish populations in the world. Western Europe. London, Paris, and Berlin became hubs for Jewish immigrants fleeing Russian persecution. Sephardic communities in Amsterdam and elsewhere absorbed new waves of Ashkenazi Jews. 7. The rise of Jewish nationalism. Modernity also gave rise to Zionism, the idea of Jewish self-determination. Moses Hess argued in the 1860s for a Jewish state in Palestine. Leo Pinsker's Auto-Emancipation, 1882, declared Jews could only be free in their own homeland. In the 1890s, Theodor Herzl founded political Zionism, calling for a Jewish homeland in Palestine. While many Jews embraced integration into their home nations, others believed only a Jewish homeland could ensure safety and continuity. 8. Internal tensions and identity. By the end of the 19th century, Jews were caught between integrationists, who saw themselves as citizens of modern Europe, traditionalists, who preserved insular community life, Zionists and socialists, who sought new political solutions. These tensions would shape Jewish history in the 20th century. 9. Foundations for the modern Jewish world. The 18th and 19th centuries created the framework for Jewish modernity. The Haskalah opened Jews to secular culture and intellectual life. Emancipation gave Jews legal equality, but also exposed them to modern anti-Semitism. New religious denominations emerged, reflecting different responses to modernity. Mass migration reshaped the geography of Jewish life, especially in America. Zionism laid the groundwork for a new vision of Jewish national identity. The stage was now set for the turbulent 20th century, with its mix of hope and catastrophe. 10. Looking ahead. The next chapter will cover Part 19, Jews in the 20th Century, Catastrophe, Resilience, and the State of Israel, focusing on the Holocaust, the rebirth of Jewish life, and the founding of Israel. Part 19, Jews in the 20th Century, Catastrophe, Resilience, and the State of Israel. 1. Entering the 20th Century. At the dawn of the 20th century, Jews were spread across Europe, the Middle East, and the Americas. Communities thrived in Eastern Europe, Russia, Poland, Lithuania, Ukraine, where millions of Jews lived in shtetls and urban centers. Western Europe, Germany, France, Britain, where emancipation had opened paths to cultural and political life. The Ottoman Empire and Middle East, with centuries-old Sephardic and Mizrahi communities. North America, where Jewish immigration from Eastern Europe created new cultural hubs. Jews entered the century with hopes of progress and equality, but the 20th century would test Jewish survival in unprecedented ways. 2. The Holocaust, a catastrophe beyond measure. Rise of Nazism. After World War I, anti-Semitism in Europe intensified. The Treaty of Versailles and economic collapse in Germany fueled resentment, with Jews scapegoated for national humiliation. In 1933, Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party came to power, implementing racial anti-Semitism as state policy. Systematic oppression. Jews were stripped of citizenship under the Nuremberg Laws, 1935. Synagogues, businesses, and homes were attacked in Kristallnacht, 1938. Ghettos and forced labor camps confined Jews in occupied Europe. The final solution. In 1941, the Nazis launched the systematic extermination of the Jews, known as the Holocaust, Shoah. 6 million Jews were murdered in concentration and extermination camps such as Auschwitz, Treblinka, and Sobibor. Entire communities in Poland, Lithuania, Ukraine, and beyond were wiped out. Resistance and survival. Some Jews resisted, notably in the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, 1943. Partisans fought in forests, and underground networks saved lives. Yet survival rates were tragically low, especially in Eastern Europe. The Holocaust destroyed centuries of Jewish life in Europe, leaving trauma and devastation that reshaped Jewish identity forever. 3. Aftermath and displacement. Displaced persons camps. After 1945, survivors were placed in DP camps across Europe. Many could not return to their former homes, facing hostility and violence even after the war. Migration. Hundreds of thousands of Jews emigrated to the United States, Canada, Latin America, and Palestine. Jewish life began to rebuild in America and Western Europe, while Eastern Europe remained under Soviet repression. 4. The birth of the State of Israel. Zionism becomes urgent. The Holocaust confirmed for many Jews that only a Jewish homeland could guarantee safety. Jewish immigration to Palestine, begun in the late 19th century, accelerated. British mandate and conflict. Britain controlled Palestine after World War I under the mandate system. Tensions grew between Jewish settlers and Arab residents. The Holocaust increased pressure for international recognition of a Jewish homeland. 1947 UN Partition Plan. The United Nations proposed partitioning Palestine into separate Jewish and Arab states. Jews accepted the plan, while Arab leaders rejected it. Declaration of Independence. On May 14, 1948, David Ben-Gurion declared the establishment of the State of Israel. Neighboring Arab states immediately invaded, sparking the 1948 Arab-Israeli War. Despite overwhelming odds, Israel survived and expanded its borders beyond the UN plan. 5. Jews in the Arab world. The establishment of Israel coincided with upheaval for Jews in Middle Eastern and North African countries. Ancient communities in Iraq, Yemen, Egypt, and Morocco faced persecution. Over 800,000 Jews fled or were expelled between the 1940s and 1960s, many resettling in Israel. This migration reshaped Israel into a diverse society of Ashkenazi, Sephardic, and Mizrahi Jews. 6. Jewish life in the diaspora. United States. By mid-century, the U.S. became the largest Jewish community in the world. American Jews flourished in education, politics, and culture, while maintaining strong ties to Israel. Soviet Union. Jews faced anti-Semitism under communism, where religious practice was suppressed. The Refusnik movement of the 1960s, 1980s fought for the right of Soviet Jews to emigrate, many eventually reaching Israel or the U.S. Western Europe. Jewish communities rebuilt, especially in France and Britain, though anti-Semitism persisted. 7. A new era of identity. The Holocaust and Israel became twin pillars of modern Jewish identity. The Holocaust symbolized the dangers of statelessness and the necessity of remembrance. Israel became a center of Jewish pride, politics, and spirituality, though not without controversy. Jews now faced the challenge of preserving tradition while participating fully in modern life. 8. Legacy of the 20th century. The 20th century transformed Jewish existence. It saw the worst catastrophe in Jewish history with the Holocaust. It witnessed the rebirth of Jewish sovereignty with the founding of Israel. It marked the shift of Jewish population centers from Europe to Israel and America. It left a legacy of resilience, renewal, and profound cultural creativity. 9. Looking ahead. The final chapter, Part 20, Judaism in the Contemporary World, 21st Century and Beyond, will explore Jewish life today, its diversity, challenges, and global presence. Part 20, Judaism in the Contemporary World, the 21st Century and Beyond. 1. The global Jewish population today. After the devastation of the Holocaust and the upheavals of the 20th century, the Jewish people entered the 21st century with a very different demographic and geographic distribution than in earlier eras. Israel, now home to over 7 million Jews, Israel has become the world's largest Jewish community, surpassing the United States in the 2020s. United States, with about 6 million Jews, the U.S. remains a major center of Jewish life, creativity, and political influence. Other communities. France, Canada, the UK, Argentina, Russia, and Australia host significant populations, though many smaller communities face decline due to migration and assimilation. Jewish life today is vibrant, diverse, and global, but it also faces profound challenges. 2. Israel in the 21st century. Nation building and modernization. Israel has developed into a high-tech powerhouse, often called the startup nation, with innovation in medicine, cybersecurity, and agriculture. Its cities, Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, and Haifa, blend ancient tradition with modern dynamism. Ongoing conflicts. Israel continues to face conflict with Palestinians and neighboring states. Wars in Lebanon, 2006, Gaza conflicts, 2008, 2014, 2021, and tensions over Jerusalem remain central. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict continues to divide global opinion and shape Jewish identity both within and outside Israel. Diversity of Israeli society. Israel is home to Ashkenazi, Sephardic, Mizrahi, Ethiopian, and Russian Jews, as well as a significant Arab minority. The blending, and sometimes tension, between these groups shapes Israel's evolving culture. 3. American Jewry in the modern era. Identity and assimilation. Many American Jews navigate between assimilation into secular culture and maintaining Jewish tradition. Intermarriage rates are high, though new approaches to Jewish education and community engagement seek to strengthen identity. Religious movements. Orthodox Judaism remains strong, particularly among growing Hasidic communities. Conservative and reform movements adapt to modern values, addressing issues like gender equality, LGBTQ inclusion, and interfaith families. A growing number of Jews identify as cultural or secular Jews, maintaining Jewish heritage without strong religious observance. Political and social engagement. American Jews play significant roles in politics, arts, science, and business. Support for Israel, debates on social justice, and responses to anti-Semitism are defining features of Jewish public life. 4. Anti-Semitism in the modern world. Despite progress, anti-Semitism persists in new and old forms. Far-right movements spread conspiracy theories and violence, e.g., the Pittsburgh synagogue shooting in 2018. Far-left movements sometimes frame Jews or Israel as colonial or oppressive, leading to hostility in activist spaces. Online hate spreads anti-Semitic tropes rapidly across social media. Global Jewish communities continue to strengthen security, advocacy, and education in response. 5. The digital age and Judaism. The Internet has transformed Jewish life. Virtual communities allow global Torah study and cultural exchange. Online synagogues and classes became especially vital during the COVID-19 pandemic. Digital anti-Semitism and misinformation, however, pose serious risks. Technology has become both a tool of renewal and a new frontier of vulnerability. 6. Jewish diversity and revival. Sephardic and Mizrahi renewal. After decades of marginalization, Sephardic and Mizrahi traditions are increasingly celebrated in music, cuisine, and scholarship. Ethiopian Jews. The Aliyah of Ethiopian Jews in the 1980s, 1990s brought unique traditions to Israel, though integration challenges persist. Post-Soviet Jewry. The fall of the USSR freed millions of Jews to emigrate, primarily to Israel, the US, and Germany. Today, Russian-speaking Jewish communities thrive in the diaspora. 7. Jewish culture in the 21st century. Jewish creativity flourishes in literature, film, music, and art. Writers like Amos Oz and Nicole Krauss explore Jewish themes. Film and TV often engage with Jewish history and identity. Festivals, museums, and heritage projects preserve memory while shaping the future. 8. Judaism and global issues. Jews engage with pressing global issues. Climate change. Jewish organizations advocate for environmental sustainability rooted in biblical principles of stewardship. Human rights. Jewish voices are active in refugee assistance, civil rights, and social justice. Science and innovation. Jewish thinkers contribute disproportionately to technology, medicine, and academia. 9. The future of Judaism. Looking forward, Judaism faces critical questions. How will Jewish identity adapt to assimilation and intermarriage? Can Israel achieve peace with its neighbors while maintaining security and democracy? Will anti-Semitism intensify or diminish in the digital era? How will technology reshape Jewish learning, prayer, and community? Despite uncertainties, Jewish history demonstrates resilience, reinvention, and survival against all odds. 10. Conclusion. Eternal people. From Abraham's covenant to the digital age, the Jewish people have carried a unique story of faith, survival, and creativity. Judaism has endured slavery, exile, persecution, and genocide, yet it continues to thrive, adapt, and inspire. The 21st century presents both challenges and opportunities. With vibrant centers in Israel, the US, and beyond, and with diverse voices shaping its destiny, Judaism remains not just a religion but a living civilization, a moral force, and a people bound by memory, hope, and resilience. As the Jewish saying goes, Am Yisrael Chai, the people of Israel live. That concludes our episode tonight that covers the entirety of Judaism, Jewish history, and its effects on civilization today. I hope you enjoyed, and make sure to like and subscribe for more daily uploads. Background Historian out.